Shinobi and Wizards Naruto Harry Potter. Author, Dantadiva. After the events of the last school year, Dumbledore asked the Hokage for help to protect Hogwarts and Harry Potter. A letter from Dumbledore. Tsunade didn't really know what to think of the letter in her hand, which was held closed by a red wax seal. Only a few minutes ago an owl flew through the open window into the office. The strong flapping of the wings caused countless papers to fall to the ground. The bird had settled on one of the tall piles of paper and looked curiously at the blonde woman. As carefully as possible, the fifth Hokage opened the rather thick letter, from which an old sock immediately fell out. Confused and slightly disgusted, the Hokage stared at the piece of cloth. Quickly she unfolded the paper and began to read the letter. Dear Hokage-sama, my name is Albus Dumbledore, the headmaster of the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. I've been thinking about asking for your help for some time now. Last school year a very dark, powerful wizard has returned and there is a danger that he will attack the school. To protect my students, I would like to hire Shinobi to protect Hogwarts and especially one particular student. His name is Harry James Potter and he may be the only one who can stop the Dark Lord. If you accept the assignment, it would be very good if you could send a Shinobi among others who has experience as a teacher. They would travel in 2 days with a port key, the sock, to the Leaky Cauldron and meet Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks there. The mission would last the whole school year and I am willing to pay the necessary price. Please let me know your answer as soon as possible. You can send it back with the owl. I hope for a good cooperation. Yours sincerely, Albus Dumbledore. Tsunade sighed loudly. Wizards. Many don't believe them to be real, and she wouldn't believe it either if she hadn't have met Albus Dumbledore herself through her sensei. She didn't have to think long before she knew she'd accepted the assignment. The village can use any money they can get. There is also peace between the ninja villages. She immediately searched for an empty piece of paper and called Shizune. Shortly afterwards she ran into the room. Tsunade-sama, what can I do for you? Asked the brown-haired woman with a little pig on her arm. Shizune, get Team 7 here immediately. They are assigned an important mission, Tsunade said and wrote a letter to Dumbledore. Now she only had to wait for the agreement of the 4 shinobi. Barely 5 minutes later, 4 figures appeared in front of her. Tsunade Bahn, what's this all about? I was just about to eat ramen, said the blonde-haired ninja in orange-black clothes and 3 whiskers on his cheek, pouting. Shut up, Dobie, said a black-haired boy. Yes, Sasuke came back to Konoha after Naruto yelled at him for hours how stupid this whole action is and that he should finally come home where they could help him kill Itachi. Of course Sasuke had refused at first, but after Naruto's puppy eyes he couldn't say no. It had been obvious that Sasuke wasn't really welcome in Konoha after what he did, and it took him a long time to go on missions again, of course only with Naruto's company, as he was probably the only one who could stop Sasuke. Tsunade knew exactly why Sasuke had come back. It was only because of Naruto and nothing else. For her it was obvious what they felt for each other, and she knew that Sasuke at least knew about his own feelings. But she wasn't so sure about Naruto. Stop calling me that, Temi, Naruto said and pointed the finger at Sasuke, who only rolled with his black eyes. The pink-haired girl standing next to the 2 sighed briefly. Nothing really changed after Sasuke came back. The 2 idiots still argue every day, but Sakura knew that Naruto was afraid that Sasuke would turn around and leave again. He won't admit it, but it's obvious to her. She had always suspected that something was wrong, and now that she was older she could see it. The 2 were in love with each other, and it was so painfully obvious that they couldn't see it themselves. Sakura had been over Sasuke for a long time. She knew that he would never feel the same for her, so she moved on. If she had been told 4 years ago that she will be in a relationship with Ino Yamanaka, she probably would have beaten him and run to Sasuke. But now she was happier than ever. So Shizune just said that it was a mission. What are the details? The grey-haired Jounin with the mask also spoke now. I just got a letter from Albus Dumbledore. He is the headmaster of a school for young witches and wizards and asked us for help to protect his school. This mission lasts almost the whole year and can be very dangerous. You can say no, but this mission earns a lot of money and there is the possibility to form some kind of alliance with the wizards, said the Hokage, resting her head on her hands. But wizards don't exist, Bahn. Naruto said unbelievably. Naruto, sometimes there are things that even we don't understand. The wizards live mainly in Europe and America. We don't really exist for them either, so what do you say? Do you accept the mission or not? We accept, Kakashi said after everyone gave him a nod. What exactly should we do, Bahn? Naruto asked and crossed his arms behind his head and grinned. But when Tsunade spoke the next words, it disappeared again. You will be exchange students from Japan who will attend the lessons to learn the Western magic. Not only do we have to protect Hogwarts, but also a boy named Harry Potter who is the same age as you. He is the main target of a dark, powerful wizard. And you, Kakashi, will teach there. More information you'll get from Dumbledore-sama. It starts in 2 days. The day after tomorrow at this time you will be back here in my office to travel to London, understand? Hi, said all four, not exactly enthusiastic about going to school again or teaching a bunch of kids about something he probably doesn't even know himself. An old man with lemon drops. 2 days later, Team 7 was standing in the Hokage office. Naruto didn't actually want to leave Konoha for a whole year, but the others promised to visit them in Hogwarts from time to time. Sasuke had no problems at all. He was even happy to finally leave this village because he had everything that was important with him on the mission. Sakura took it a while to persuade her parents to let her go on this mission, and when they finally agreed after hours of discussions, she immediately had all the books that have something to do with wizards from the library to fetch and read. Kakashi hadn't really intended to prepare for the mission and just randomly stuffed some stuff into his bag and said goodbye to Rin, Obito and Minato before he went to Naruto to wake him up because he knew the blonde-haired ninja would oversleep. Tsunade looked at the four and then put the old sock on the table. This will take you to a place called Leaky Cauldron where you will meet Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks. They are friends of Dumbledore-sama and will be in charge of you until the start of your assignment. Please do not make it too difficult for them, Naruto, and please don't demonstrate your powers too much, Sasuke. Try to act normal as you can. Any more questions? Tsunade ended her little speech. Everyone shook their heads. Okay, perfect. Please touch the sock and don't let go. I wish you good luck, you will need it, said the Hokage, and Team 7 took the sock and waited. After a few minutes in which nothing happened, they suddenly felt an unpleasant tingling in their stomach and their surroundings covered in thousands of colors. All four shinobi landed more or less safely on their feet with the feeling of vomiting and all hoping never to experience something like this again. When the nausea finally subsided, they looked around in the room in which they landed. It was an old, shabby bar where a few men and women in funny clothes sat, looking at the ninja confused. That must be the Leaky Cauldron, Kakashi thought, and turned to his students. Are you guys all right? He asked, and the three nodded and kept looking around. Suddenly a man with brown hair and scars appeared in front of them. He also wore funny clothes that looked better than those of the other people in the room. Next to him stood a young woman with colorful hair and looked at the shinobi friendly. You must be the people Dumbledore was talking about, right? The man asked, but the four couldn't understand it. They looked at each other shortly before Sakura said in very broken English, sorry, can't understand. Now the man, Remus Lupin, also recognized his mistake and immediately took out his wand. He mumbled a few words and swung the wand in his hand. Ridiculous, Sasuke thought and felt a little tingling in his body. Can you understand me now? Remus asked, and the four shinobi looked at each other surprised. In fact, they could understand him now. Yes, thank you. You must be Remus Lupin, don't you? Said the Hokage. That's right, and that's Nymphadora Tonks, but call her Tonks, she doesn't really like her first name, said the older-looking man, pointing to the woman next to him. Pleased to meet you. I am Kakashi Hatake, the leader of this team, and these are my students Naruto Uzumaki, Sasuke Uchiha, and Sakura Haruno, Kakashi replied and pointed to his students. Everyone bowed and Tonks said, we should really get going. We'll explain everything to you when we get to the headquarters. There you will also meet Dumbledore. Tonks reached into a bag and took out a smaller bag. Then she went to the chimney that was on the wall and stood inside. She grinned and shouted, grim old place. Loud and clear, and was swallowed by green flames. The four foreigners looked at each other in wonder before Naruto said with his loud voice, that was cool, how did she do that? Doesn't that hurt? Every time I stand in the fire it hurts. Sasuke only looked at him with an indefinable look. Did this idiot seriously put himself in a fire? Okay, so you just take a handful of the flu powder and stand in the fireplace. Then you throw the powder on the floor and say Grimmauld Place as clearly as possible, understand? Don't worry, it doesn't hurt, it just tickles a little, Remus said. So who wants to go first? He asked the group, and Naruto immediately raised his hand. Sasuke looked at his dobi and rolled his eyes. Typical Naruto, so turned up and cute as always. Wait, what? Quickly the Uchiha shook his head, and Sakura looked at him with a curious look, wondering why he just shook his head. He just looked at Naruto, who disappeared into the flames just like Tonks, and ignored Sakura's gaze. He was really happy when he heard that the pink-haired girl was with Ino. 2 fangirls less, although since he had left the village, the rest of them hadn't noticed him at all. Well, he couldn't care less. The most important thing for Sasuke was that Naruto trusted him, even though he would never say that out loud. Nevertheless, he tried to make it as easy as possible for Naruto. He did what the elders wanted of him and hardly ever complained about it. After all, Naruto was responsible for him, and if he did something wrong, Naruto would get into trouble too. Sasuke, come, you're next. Kakashi ripped the black-haired boy out of his thoughts, who immediately took some of the powder and climbed into the fireplace. When everyone arrived at Grimmauld Place, they walked into a room with a big table and many chairs. It had to be the kitchen and the dining room, because Kakashi could also see a small kitchen unit in the room. You can sit down here. Dumbledore will be here in a short time, Tonks said, and left the room. Remus sat down at the table with the 4 shinobi. Naruto looked around. Somehow the room reminded him of his apartment in Konoha. Somewhat messy and small but cozy. They only had to wait a few minutes and the door was pushed open. A rather tall old man came in with a long grey beard reaching over his belly and long grey hair. He wore a light blue robe with a hat of the same color. His eyes were covered by semicircular glasses and his lips wore a light smile. Hello, I hope you had a pleasant journey. My name is Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, the headmaster of Hogwarts. It is a pleasure to meet you and I hope for a good cooperation. Would anyone like a lemon drop? Sasuke in gay panic. The 4 shinobi sat at the long table. The looks of the remaining persons in the room were directed at them. Just after Dumbledore had arrived at Grimmauld Place 12, he had called the other members of the Order of the Phoenix. I would like to introduce you to our guests. These are Kakashi Hatake, who will be teaching at the school this year, and his students Naruto Uzumaki, Sasuke Uchiha, and Sakura Haruno, who will attend Hogwarts as exchange students from Japan. As you may have noticed, they are not magicians. I don't want to say too much about them and their mission, but what I can say is that they will protect Hogwarts this year. After what happened with Diggory, I wanted to be on the safe side. Dumbledore finished his little speech and shoved a lemon drop into his mouth. But Albus, these are only children, they can hardly be older than Harry. How can they protect him? Asked the somewhat chubby woman with the red hair. Miss, where we come from we've been considered adults for a long time. I'm sure we're up to the task, said the grey-haired Jounin for the first time and gave the woman, Molly Weasley, a little smile with only one eye visible. You could clearly see that Mrs. Weasley still didn't agree, but the 4 ninja were glad she didn't say anything else. Tonight Harry will arrive here, yet you will go to Leaky Cauldron. I'm sure Harry is in good hands here, and otherwise it would be too noticeable, don't you think? Dumbledore asked and smiled at the shinobi friendly, who just nodded. After they discussed a few more topics, most of the Order members left. Shortly before Team 7 set off with Professor Dumbledore for the Leaky Cauldron, Sirius Black, Harry's godfather, as they learned earlier, approached them. I wanted to thank you for taking care of Harry. Just so you know, he attracts problems magnetically, and I don't know who you are and what you can do, but I trust Dumbledore in his decision. Please keep an eye on him while I can't, he said. Sakura noticed how tired the man looked. His slightly longer brown hair hung in his face and bags were clearly visible under his eyes. Don't worry, mister, we'll take good care of him. I mean, that's our job, Dadabayo, said Naruto, energetic as ever. Sirius nodded to them and made his way to Remus, who leaned against the door frame. Are all ready? Asked the long-bearded man and stretched his arm out towards the shinobi. When all affirmed, he added, then please hold on tight. As soon as their hands touched the headmaster's arm, everything blurred again and an unpleasant feeling spread in their stomachs. Without making much noise, the 5 landed in the Leaky Cauldron again. But this time they didn't end up in the bar itself but in a narrow corridor with many wooden doors. They didn't have to wait long until an old-looking man with a crooked back walked up the stairs. "Are you a professor? I was wondering where you were," he said and shook the hand of the headmaster. "I'm sorry you had to wait. Would you be so kind as to take my guests to their rooms?" Dumbledore asked the man, who immediately agreed. "I have to go now, I have an urgent appointment. The rest of the information I wrote down for you is already in your rooms. Oh yes, before I forget, unfortunately there were only 3 rooms left. 2 of you would have to share a room," he said and smiled innocently just to disappear. "Naruto," Kakashi said, and the blonde one turned to him. "Surely you don't mind sharing a room with Sasuke, do you?" Kakashi asked, and if you looked closely you could see a little grin under the mask. "No, not at all, Kakashi-sensei." "Come on, duckbutt," Naruto said and pulled a somewhat perplexed-looking Sasuke behind him into the room whose door the man had opened. As soon as the door closed, Sakura turned to her sensei with a grin. "That was intentional or not, sensei?" she asked and walked after the man to the next door. "I don't know what you're talking about, Sakura. You can have the room, rest well, you probably won't get so much sleep anytime soon," Kakashi said, and Sakura disappeared after a short hi in her room. Sasuke didn't know what to think of this situation. After they had gone into the room, Naruto claimed one of the 2 beds and dropped on it like a wet bag of sand. A few minutes later he decided it was boring and that he was going to take a shower. So far so good, but what Sasuke didn't expected was that Naruto would look that good with just a towel around his waist and wet hair that stuck to his forehead and the drops of water that fell from it onto his chest. With a little red-tinted cheeks, Sasuke looked away and said as emotionless as he could, "Put some clothes on, Dobby." After that he hurried into the bathroom and left a slightly confused Naruto in the bedroom, who just shrugged with his shoulders. Buying wands and stuff. Today they would visit Diagon Alley to buy all the supplies they need for the year. To say Sasuke was in a bad mood was an understatement. The mere thought of what was coming from now on gave him a headache, and a constantly talking Naruto didn't help in the slightest. "I still can't believe it, any Sasuke. I mean, these are wizards. I always thought they were just fairy tales," said the blonde while dressing in his very orange clothes. "Dobby, don't you think you should wear something that will not give people eye cancer the second they see you?" said Sasuke in an uninterested tone. "Oh, I'm sorry that I'm not dressed like that," counters Naruto. "Also, I'm going to wear a cloak, Temi." Sasuke opened to say something when the door to their room busted open and revealed a girl with pink hair and the same cloak that Naruto was wearing. "Are you ready yet?" "We are just waiting for you," she said, and then turned her back to us and walked over to Kakashi. "We are ready." "Come on, Temi," said the blonde and took the raven's hand. If Sakura and Kakashi noticed the blush that was spreading over my cheeks, they decided to not say anything, which I was glad about. "Wait here, I will talk to the bartender." "He know where we have to go," said Kakashi, and made his way over to the counter and talked to the guy from yesterday. After a few seconds he and the guy came back and we were led out of a back door of the bar. And what we saw was a brick wall. Naruto made a short confused sound while the guy began to tip some of the bricks. Suddenly the wall began to move and formed an entrance. You could see many people walking by and chatter about various things. "Welcome to Diagon Alley. I would recommend to visit Gringotts first, that is a wizarding bank. There you can get the money you will buy your school supplies from. I believe Professor Dumbledore gave you the key for the vault," said the guy, and began walking back into the building after Kakashi nodded. The 3 of them began walking along the many wizards and witches. Naruto stopped at least 10 shops to look what cool magical stuff they sell there. Sasuke couldn't help but find the excited look on Naruto's face cute. But shortly after the thought crossed his mind, he shook his head. Not the time to think about this. Sakura looked into a flower shop window and couldn't help but think about Ino. One flower especially caught her eye. It had big petals which constantly changed their color. The leaves on the flower moved and made it look like it was dancing. Maybe Ino would like one of these. After some time the 4 arrived before a white building with pillars. Gringotts. "All right, please let me do the talking, okay? And Naruto, please don't try to cause any kind of trouble," said the silver-haired Jounin, and opened the large doors. Inside was just as beautiful as outside, and Sakura admired the architecture of the building. They walked over to a shelter and were greeted by an, well, different-looking creature. The raven-haired shinobi could practically feel that Naruto wanted to make a comment and put his hand on the blonde's mouth just before any sound could escape it. Naruto just looked at him and rolled with his blue eyes. Then he stuck his tongue out and licked at Sasuke's hand, who made a disgusted noise and retreated his hand. After they got their money, decided to at first buy their wand. They made their way to Ollivander's. They stopped before a really old-looking shop. The shop really did see better days. Sakura stepped forward and opened the door. A little bell announced their arrivals. Hurried from the back of the shop came her old man. "Welcome to Ollivander, the best wand maker you can find," said the old man. "Ollivander. Who want to go first?" Naruto's hand shot up in excitement and he said, "Me. I will go first." Then he stepped forward and waited, not exactly sure what he should do now. "All right, please hold out your wand hand," said Ollivander, and already had an tape measure ready. The blonde shinobi then held out his right hand, assuming with a wand hand the old man means your superior hand. After taking all the measurements, he walked into the back of the shop and came back with lots of boxes. "All right, try this one out." "Holy, 11-foot dragon heartstring," said the man and held the wand out for Naruto to take it. Naruto took it in the hand and gave it a swing. At first nothing happened and Ollivander furrowed his brows in confusion, but suddenly the wand busted and made Naruto scream a little. "Oh well, looks like that's not the one," Ollivander murmured. Then he turned to the other wand. After some time and many busted wands and destroyed items later, the one Naruto currently held looked like he accepted Naruto as a little breeze swayed in the room and light surrounded Naruto. That is really interesting. After so many years you are the first one to get a reaction with this wand. You must be quite powerful, my boy, said Ollivander and turned to the other shinobi. Who wants to go next? Nearly half an hour later the four left the shop. What else do we need, Kakashi-sensei? Asked Sakura. You still need the books and robes, also cauldrons and maybe a pet, if you like, answered the Jounin as he looked on his list. Then we better start. I have no motivation to stay longer than necessary, said Sasuke and stared straight forward with a bored look. Oh, come on, Temi, are you not at least a little bit excited? I mean, wizards have so many cool stuff here, said the blonde as he turned to his black-haired comrade. It's all just a waste of magic, Usuran Tonkachi. After a few hours in with Naruto got lost nearly 5 times, they arrived at the bar. With full backs and nearly no motivation left, in Sasuke and Kakashi's case, they started to go back into their rooms. Make sure to read through all the books of the last years, okay? You need to be prepared, said Kakashi and turned to his room. Good night then. But Kakashi-sensei, it's only afternoon, said Sakura and let out a long sigh when her lazy sensei didn't respond. Well, I will go to my room too. There is much to do, see tomorrow, and with these words Sakura also left. Sasuke took Naruto's arm and shoved him into the room. The bags with all the stuff they bought landed near the desk. The Raven then sat on his bed and watched Naruto do the same. So what are we going to do now? Asked the blonde. We have to study. But I don't want to, Sasuke. Can't we do something fun like, I don't know, play board games or something? Or we could cuddle. Yeah, we should do that, said Naruto and stood up from his bed. Sasuke's eyes widened slightly as Naruto stopped still before him. Then he let himself fall directly onto Sasuke, who landed with his back on his mattress. Let go, Dobi. What the hell are you doing? Said Sasuke, confused and embarrassed as he tried to shove Naruto away. Oh, come on, Temi, I know you like it. You don't even really try to shove my way, laughed the blonde and laid his head on Sasuke's chest. Whatever. The journey to Hogwarts. The days flew by pretty fast. If you asked Naruto, it was the most boring time in his life. Every day was occupied with studying the different subjects that are being taught at Hogwarts. Of course, some were fun for Naruto, like charms or defense against dark arts, but he still asked himself why it is so important to learn about magic plants or history that, in most parts, is not necessary for their mission and does not interest him in the slightest. Sasuke was not overly impressed with all the stuff wizards could do because in the end all it takes to defeat them is snapping their wand out of their hands. Weaklings. Unnecessary. These were words he often used to describe wizards and their methods. It also did not help that Naruto constantly decided to annoy the living shit out of the raven-haired shinobi. Even though the blonde looked quite cute when talking excitingly about a new charm he mastered, Sasuke just wanted to slam his head against a near wall. Another reason for his clearly non-existent motivation is that Kakashi decided to tease the Uchiha whenever he saw him staring a little too long at his blonde-haired comrade. At least Sakura kept her distance and was often seen in her room studying or writing letters to the Yamanaka heir. And then the day they all more Naruto and Sakura, waited for arrived. The morning began uneventful. They ate breakfast in silence and packed their stuff after that. With the help of the bartender they safely arrived at King's Cross. Around them bustled many people, some were non-magical, others were radiating with magical power. The four shinobi decided to wear the most inconspicuous clothes they owned, which resulted that they looked like they wanted to attend a funeral other than joining a train full of children to a magical school. At first they didn't quite know where they should go. The bartender left them just like that without giving directions or at least one little hint where they have to go. After some observing from Kakashi, he pretty fast acknowledged the fact that they indeed have to run though a brick wall to get to platform 9 3/4. It looked like you don't need a specific spell to go through the wall, so they hoped luck was on their side. Sakura bravely volunteered to go first and ran straight towards the wall. Just seconds later she disappeared. Naruto excitedly clapped into his hands and also ran towards the wall and disappeared. "You go next, Sork," said the gray-haired sensei, his voice muffled because of his mask. Many strangers stared on. Of course they stared. It was not common to see a guy with gray hair that does not know the rules of gravity and a face mask and a pink-haired girl. HN. Yeah, very original, but Sasuke really did not want to speak too much. He began to run and out of pure instinct he wanted to stop right before he was about to hit the stone wall, but he pulled himself together and ran straight through it. On the other side an overwhelming amount of voice and talking slammed against his sensitive ears. He saw Naruto and Sakura standing next to each other a few meters away, their stuff on carts in front of them, staring awestruck at the red and black train and all the children who entered it. "Come on, we need to hurry if we want to find an compartment." Sasuke didn't even realize that their sensei also passed the wall and was now standing next to them. They all began to walk towards the train, trying not to get too much attention. What did not quite go as planned, if you asked Sasuke. Here and there people stared but quickly turned their head away after a glare from Sasuke or a bored one-eyed look from Kakashi. After their baggage was safely stored away they started to search for an empty compartment, which was harder than they thought. They arrived pretty late, which resulted in less free seats to take. Nearly 5 minutes later they finally found one. Naruto sat on the bench so he would ride backwards, next to him a window to look outside, obviously. On his right sat Sasuke. Across from him sat Kakashi, and next to the oldest shinobi sat Sakura, who took out a book from her bag along with a pencil. She then decided to read said book and started to write note in it, probably for better understanding. Kakashi also began to read, but not a book like Sakura. He took out a scroll and studied it. That left Naruto and Sasuke with nothing to do. To say Naruto was bored was an understatement. Sometime he pointed outside the window to show the Uchiha an interesting feature of the landscape or in funny formation of an cloud. Sasuke just listened quickly to the blonde's ramble while trying to subtlety stare and fail at Naruto. After 30 minutes Kakashi closed the scroll and cleared his throat to get the attention of his students. "I will explain to you the basic things about Hogwarts and how we will fit into it, okay?" And Naruto listened closely. "Okay, I will only explain items," said the older. Naruto nodded and leaned into proof that he is really listening. "Okay, so students are divided into 4 houses: Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff and Slytherin. The students are selected after character traits, so you will have no say in what house you get. As you already know, you 3 will pose as Japanese exchange students, and I am your supervisor and will teach at Hogwarts for this year. We are allowed to show of our basic power, but please nothing too destructive, and Sasuke, please do not disturb the students with a genjutsu just because they annoy you. If you have any questions or need help, just come to me or one of the teachers you already meet. Also, do not tell anyone about our mission, do you understand?" Kakashi looked at everyone with his one eye, his gaze is serious and leaves no room for objections. "Hi, Sensei," said the 3 students together. Okay, then you should start changing into your uniforms. It seems like we are almost there, said the Hokage and clapped into his hands while standing up and handing everyone their uniform. Wherever he took them from. Sakura left the compartment to find a place to change, while Naruto couldn't care less and decided to just change on the spot. Sasuke looked away, a tint of red on his cheeks, and started to change his clothes. With the hell do I act like a schoolgirl in love? Let me introduce you to her. As the train started slowing down, all four of them were standing in their compartment with their school uniforms on. Naruto loosened his tie a bit to keep him from getting strangled. I think it is best if we take off our hitaite. We are going to attract attention, whether we want it or not, but maybe we can avoid more questions like that, said Kakashi and began to take off the forehead protector. His silver hair now hung loosely in his face and the cruel scar over his eye now on full display. He hurried to take out an eye patch from his pocket and put it on. His three students followed his lead and took off the forehead protectors and put them in their luggage. Meanwhile, the train has fully stopped at their destination and students began to leave their compartments. The shinobi were one of the last persons to leave. With their heads hanging as low as possible, they tried to not attract unwanted attention, especially Sakura with her pink hair. Would you see Kakashi, you would just assume he is old with his gray hair, and all but Sasuke believed that even in the wizarding world pink hair was not common. All right, everyone. First years with me, the rest please take the carriages, spoke a really tall man with a large beard and gestured for the youngest students to follow them. Naruto stared in awe at the giant and Sakura nearly walked into him as he stopped walking. Quickly she nudged his shoulder and told him to not just stand there. They then went after the rest of the students to the carriages. Sasuke stopped in his tracks as he saw what exactly it was that pulls the carriage. Skeleton-like horses with wings looked at them with their dark eyes. These are thestrals. They are invisible to most people. Only these who have seen death can see them, explained Sakura softly as Naruto carefully stroked their heads. Come on, we have to hurry or we might be too late, said the Jounin, and together they boarded the carriage. The ride wasn't long and went by in silence. Even though Naruto didn't want to admit it, he was nervous. Of course he was. This a whole different world for him, with another language, but thankfully the charm took care of that issue and many new people. It took him a long time to be accepted in the village. Will it be the same here? What if they found out about him? Will they be scared just like the people at home? He asked himself many questions in his head. He was so occupied in his own thoughts that he didn't realize that Sasuke, who sat next to him, took his shaking hand into his. When they arrived before the giant castle, it looked like most of the other students already went to the Great Hall. They began to enter the castle through the large doors and were greeted right away by an old woman with a pointed hat and glasses. You must be our guest Professor Dumbledore talked about. I'm Professor McGonagall, the head teacher of Gryffindor and also the Transfiguration teacher. She introduced herself and shook hands with Kakashi before she started talking again. You will be sorted apart from the first years. You may wait before the entrance of the Great Hall. You will hear when it's time for you to enter. Mr. Hokage will come with me, she said, and lead them in front of a large set of wooden doors. The three young shinobi nodded and stood still while their sensei was led away from them. I'm hungry, said the blonde shinobi in a frustrated tone, which earned him a slap at the back of his head by Sakura and an eye roll of Sasuke. Harry was sitting at the Gryffindor table in the Great Hall together with Hermione and Ron. They talked in hushed tones with some other Gryffindors. Seamus was in the middle of a story about how he nearly let the kitchen at his house explode again as the door beside the teacher's table opened and a grey-haired male entered the large room. He was tall and had a mask over the lower part of his face and an eye patch over his left eye. That was all Harry could recognize from this distance. The unknown male took the chair between Snape and a woman in pink who looked oddly like the toad in the Dursleys' garden he saw a few days ago. A few moments later, the doors to the Great Hall opened and McGonagall entered the hall with the new first years tailing behind her. Their wide eyes looked around the room excitedly and the candle light reflected in them. Harry wondered if he looked the same when he first entered the school. The sorting went by quite quickly. Harry clapped every time a first year was sorted into Gryffindor, but he wasn't really paying attention. The next time Harry looked to the front, Dumbledore was standing on the little podium. Welcome, new students, at Hogwarts, and the others welcome back. At first I would like to introduce the new additions to our staff, our new defense against the dark arts teacher, Professor Dolores Umbridge and Dash. Dumbledore got cut off by an high-pitched sound that came from the pink toad. She stood up from her chair and started walking towards Dumbledore and then took his place on the podium. The whole hall has gone quiet as the woman talked in a very high voice about things Harry did not understand and didn't plan to do so. Maybe Hermione would tell him later. After 5 cruel minutes her speech ended and Dumbledore took his place again. As I wanted to say, we not only have a new data teacher. I was so free to create a new subject, fitness and health. The students from 3rd year and up have to take part in this subject. I figured it would be a good chance to blow off some steam between the stressful lessons. I'm happy to introduce Professor Hattake. He came from the Far East as part of an exchange program and will be teaching TJ a new subject. Dumbledore paused for a moment and let the lazy applause and the whisper of the students about the new teachers die down. After many years I contacted an old friend and we had the idea of an one-time exchange program between our schools. Please let me introduce your new classmates. At the same time Dumbledore gestured at the door with his hand. It did swing open. All heads turned to the entrance and as soon as they laid eyes on the 3 persons standing there, the whispers began again. The 3 started walking down the hall and stopped in front of the teacher's table. These are the exchange students from Japan, please welcome them. A round of applause could be heard in the room and nobody could really take off their eyes of them. They will now be sorted into the houses and will participate in the lesson of the 5th year. I ask you to take good care of them. The techniques are quite different from ours, so please be lenient. Dumbledore now sat down on his chair again and McGonagall once again picked up the sorting hat. Haruno Sakura echoed her voice through the room and the girl with the pink hair started walking to the chair. As far as Harry could see she was not very tall but quite handsome. Her pink hair reached her shoulders and her green eyes looked around the hall. She sat down on the chair and the hat was placed on her head. For some time there was silence before the hat shouted, "Gryffindor." Harry clapped his hands and the girl, Sakura, started walking to their table. She sat down at the end of it and stared ahead at her friends. "The next is Uchiha Sasuke," said McGonagall, and now the black-haired and slightly taller boy stepped forward and took place on the chair. As soon as everyone got a good look on his face, the girls in the hall started to talk to their friends, probably about his good looks. The boy's eyes were cold and his face showed no emotion, and Harry must say that he actually looked flawless. For some reason he reminded him of Draco Malfoy. As soon as the hat touched his head he shouted, "Slytherin," and Harry couldn't bring himself to be surprised. Uzumaki Naruto. The last boy made his way to the chair. He was the complete opposite of this Sasuke guy. His hair was blonde and hung over his bright blue eyes. On both cheeks were 3 whisker-like scars which made him look like a fox. He was cute, was all Harry could think, but he quickly shook his head. The hat was placed on top of his head and a long time nothing happened. The face of the boy constantly was put in a frown and from the corner of his eyes Harry could see the black-haired boy, Sasuke, fidgeting in his seat. It felt like an eternity but eventually the hat shouted, "Gryffindor," though the hall and the whole table clapped again. The boy hurriedly took off the hat and walked to their table. He took a seat across the pink-haired girl who looked at him with concern in her eyes. "I did it. Another chapter is finished. I hope you like it and I'm sorry if there are any mistakes. It took me quite some time to write this because I actually couldn't find the right words to describe everything, so I'm sorry about that, and I think it's longer than the other chapters IDK. I will try to update ASAP." Meeting the trio. Normally Naruto does not mind getting a lot of attention, but here he was more anxious than anything else. When he looked around the giant hall with floating candles and these massive tables and goddamn ghost, the stares he got felt like needles on his skin. Deep down he knew that these people are probably only curious, but he couldn't help feeling uneasy. Sakura could practically see the uneasiness radiating of the blonde and she really wanted to help her friend, but she didn't know how. She knew that words don't help Naruto in such a situation, and she also knew that Sasuke probably would know what to do, even though he would deny it. But judging from the nasty stares the Gryffindor and Slytherin table throw at each other, people of these houses do not get along. The raven-haired boy would not care about such thing, Sakura knew, but it would attract attention, and that is the last thing they want. The kunoichi looked across the hall to the table with the green banners above. Sasuke has seated himself as far away from the other students as possible. What an unsocial ass, but they don't seem to get the hint Sasuke gives, that he does want to be alone and try to talk with him, readers flirt. The girls practically swoon over him and even the guys steal some glances at him. The mere thought that she did the exact same thing when they were younger makes her want to puke. After Sasuke left the village, she had time to wake up and sort out her feelings. Being away from her crush for so long made her realize that maybe she did not like Sasuke because of his looks, because his attitude is definitely not the reason, but because everyone liked him. She was always alone back then, and having the same person to talk about together makes it easier to communicate. With Sasuke gone, she had more time. Don't get her wrong, she missed him, he was their teammate and friend, but it was like a therapy for herself. After she sorted everything out, she began to talk to Ino more. At first they argued a lot, but eventually they realized they were better off together than against each other. Sakura also strengthened her bonds with Naruto, and she would go as far as saying that the Uzumaki is her best friend, so seeing him so down makes her feel sad. Here, eat that. It is really good, she said, and handed Naruto one of the many bowls that are on the table. The blonde murmured a little thanks and began to eat. Hey, do you think Sasuke is going to be okay? He looks not happy over there, asked the blonde and took another bite of his chicken. What do you mean he looks like that every day, said Sakura and stretched out her arm to get a bowl full of pudding. Don't worry about him, and in case that you miss him, what you totally do, we probably have many classes together, so don't look like kicked puppy, okay? Naruto nodded his head and was ready to take another bite when a voice made him stop in his tracks. Hey! Both Sakura, who still had a spoon with pudding in her mouth, and Naruto turned their heads to the side where a girl with bushy brown hair and two boys, one with red hair and freckles and one with unruly black hair and glasses, Saturday. It was the girl who greeted them, and when she realized that she had the exchange student's attention, she opened her mouth again. I'm Hermione Granger, it's nice to meet you. I thought that maybe you could need some help because you're new here and the castle is really big, and yeah, anyways, we could show you around tomorrow if you like, said the girl, Hermione, and smiled at them. Sakura quickly swallowed her pudding and replied, that would be very nice, thank you, I think otherwise we would get lost. Say, is your friend always that grumpy or what? So creepy it feels like watching an ice block, said the red-haired boy and made a small gesture in Sasuke's direction. Right, I'm Ron Weasley, by the way, he introduced himself. And that is Harry Potter, said Ron and pointed at the black-haired boy with glasses. Ron looked like he was waiting for something as he watched the two foreigners closely, but as none of the two showed some kind of reaction to Harry's name, he guessed that they did not spend enough time here to know who exactly his best friend was. I don't mind Sasuke. He still isn't over his emo phase and sulks the whole day, said Sakura and grinned at the trio. After half an hour, Dumbledore announced the end of the meal and wished everyone a good night. Naruto and Sakura got up in their seats together with the rest of the students in the hall and started to walk to the large door. They shortly looked over their shoulders to the teacher's table where Kakashi gave them the look and a small hand gesture, which meant that they will talk later. In the crowd, Naruto searched for his black-haired friend, and after some time he spotted the familiar raven-haired boy walk with a group of Slytherins. Hey Sasuke, shouted the blonde over the heads of the students and made his way to the Uchiha, nearly knocking over one or two people in the process while Sasuke stopped in his tracks and looked at him with an bored expression. We meet up with Kakashi this night, don't forget, said Naruto and earned a few confused looks from bypassing people. I won't, Dobby. Now go back to your house or you will get lost, this school is like a labyrinth, said Sasuke and started to turn away. Hey, will you be alright? I mean, you are alone in this house, is that okay for you? The worry in Naruto's voice was clearly noticeable and made Sasuke smirk. I'll be fine, Naruto. Stop worrying and go. I'll see you tonight. With that, the Uchiha turned to the group of Slytherins who were seemingly waiting for him. They gave both of them judging stares, clearly not fond of the interaction between a Gryffindor and a fellow Slytherin. Naruto looked after him for a while till a hand landed on his shoulder and Sakura's voice interrupted his thoughts. Let's go. Apparently you need a password to get into the dorms, and I'm not fond of spending my time in the halls because we were late, and with that they followed the rest of the Gryffindors along the corridors and up some stairs, which suddenly moved and nearly caused Naruto and another boy to fall of the stairs. They arrived before a giant portrait of a fat lady who constantly tried to break a glass with her voice but only caused ear cancer. After one of the older students said the password, the portrait swung open and revealed a big room which was decorated in red, obviously. On one wall was a big fireplace with a couch and armchairs. There was also a shelf full of books which only added to the cozy atmosphere of the room. On the other side was the beginning of a staircase which probably led to the bedrooms. All right, listen up. These stairs lead you to the bedrooms. Boys and girls obviously have separated dorms. Your luggage is already in your room. Please note that the boys are not allowed in the girls' dormitory and the same goes for the girls. I will hand you your timetables. After that you can go to your rooms and unpack. The timetables were handed to them and Naruto and Sakura quickly said goodbye and walked down the opposite corridor. On each door stood the names of the students that live in the room, and after a short time Naruto finally found the door with his name on it. He gently pushed open the door and was greeted with 7 four-poster beds and 6 somewhat familiar faces. He smiled at Ron and Harry as they entered the room. The other boys' names were still a secret to him, but he can definitely remember them sitting on the table near Harry, Ron and Hermione. Hey, you're Naruto, right? I'm Seamus and that are Neville and Dane. It's nice to officially meet you, said the smallest guy of the 3 and held out his hand for the blonde shinobi to shake. Yeah, I'm Naruto, it's nice to meet you too. I hope we have a good time, said Naruto and showed them his best smile. Patrol and lessons. It took some time till the 6 boys finally went to sleep. With a relieved sigh, Naruto stood up from his bed and changed into some of his normal clothes so he could move around better. After that he created a shadow clone who laid in his bed instead of his real self. As quickly as possible, Naruto exits the dorm room and made his way downstairs to the common room where he met Sakura, who waited for him on one of the couches. They nodded at each other and made their out of the Gryffindor dormitories. Even though the fat lady gave them some suspicious looks, she remained silent. The hallways of the castle were dark, so Sakura took out her wand and chanted a quick spell which caused the tip of her wand to light up. They made their way to the astronomy tower, making no sound while walking. Both were extremely happy when they finally arrived at the staircase of the tower and made their way up. At the top they could already see Kakashi and Sasuke leaning against a wall. All right, now that we are all here, today is our first patrol on which we all will be part of. The following night, however, we will work in teams of 2. 2 of us will patrol and the other 2 will rest. The next night we will change, said Kakashi and took out a piece of paper from one of his many pockets. It is incredibly difficult to make a map of this place, but I managed to draw the most important parts. Sasuke, you will take care of the dungeons and the first floor. Sakura and I will take care of the remaining floors, and Naruto is in charge of the outside. With his shadow clones he will be able to have insight over a large area. Is everything clear? Hi, Sensei, all 3 of them said in together. Okay, the plan of the next patrols will be made tomorrow. Good luck, and with that being said they all scatter to their assigned area. The patrol went by smoothly, and shortly before the sun started to rise all of them were back in their bed, pretending to sleep as if nothing happened. Naruto actually managed to get a good hour of sleep before he got woken up by Harry, who was still in his pajamas. Groaning and still super tired, Naruto sat up, looking around with absolutely no orientation. After getting used to the blinding sunlight that shone through the windows, he stood up once again and made his way to the bathroom that was attached to the dorm room. He brushed his teeth, showered for what felt like 2 minutes, and put on the school uniform. Grabbing his bag from beside his bed with books in it, he made his way to the Great Hall together with the other boys. The walk was somewhat uncomfortable. Between the guys was silence, and the blonde could practically feel the tension in the air. Being too tired to care, he just shrugged with his shoulders more to himself than anyone else and continued walking. They arrived in the Great Hall and sat down at their table. Sakura was already there and happily ate her breakfast, so Naruto sat down across from her and also loaded food on his plate. While he ate, his gaze wandered across the room. On the teacher's table sat Kakashi, who was in a conversation with Professor Flitwick, even though Flitwick did more of the talking and Kakashi tried his best to listen. The next time his eyes stopped on the slider and table, or more like on the raven-haired male who sat as far away from the others as possible, shoving food in his mouth with his typical frown resting on his face. Sasuke felt the gaze on him and looked up, only to meet the blue eyes of Naruto, who sent him a bright smile. Sasuke scoffed, but the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. He looked down again and continued eating, ignoring all the other students that tried to have a conversation with him. Equals. The first lesson of the day was double herbology, and Naruto hated it. It seemed like somewhat every plant disliked him, which made him pouting more times than he could count. Sakura on the other side had more luck. She could handle every single task the professor gave her and often earned praises. Harry and Ron seemed to have the same problems as Naruto, while Hermione and Neville did a good job. Sasuke wasn't in their class. They shared herbology with Hufflepuff. The time till lunch break went by quickly, which everyone was glad for. After a very boring hour of a ghost teaching them about the history of magic, Naruto was starving. So when lunch came around, he practically bathed in food, much to the dismay of Sakura and Hermione and the amusement of Harry and Ron. "Hey, how about we show you around after school, if you have time, of course," Hermione asked. "Yeah, sure, that would be nice." "Would you mind if Sasuke joined us?" replied Naruto and looked at the three. Ron wanted to open his mouth but was quickly shut up by a chicken nugget being shoved inside his mouth. "Yeah, sure, no problem," said Hermione, and sent a glare at Ron, who tried not to choke on the chicken. "Cool. Well, what is our next class again?" asked Naruto and scratched the back of his head. "Defense against the dark arts with Slytherin," answered Harry. The blonde shinobi nodded, happy to finally have a class with Sasuke. When the lunch was finished, the five of them made their way to the classroom. As they entered, they could already see many students in the room. Harry and Ron sat together pretty much in the middle of the room. On their right sat Sakura with Hermione, the two girls talking quietly aproned themselves. Naruto spotted Sasuke sitting alone on a desk on the left side of the room at the very back. Determined, the blonde sat down next to him and put his book and something to write on the desk. The rest of the rouse sent them glares, and Naruto noticed that he was the only Gryffindor sitting there, not that he cared. Sasuke chuckled slightly in his hand and muttered at Dobby. After a few minutes, the teacher came into the room. Dolores Umbridge wore as always clothes that made her look like she just fell into pink paint, and her horrible high voice and sweet tone made her unbearable. The lesson started and Naruto was confused. He thought that they would practice spells, but all they did was reading a boring book and taking notes, which was completely unnecessary. Of course, it is good to know the theory, but they also have to practice. The other students seemed to share Naruto's point of view, because it didn't take long before Harry got into an argument with the teacher. Sasuke knew that the Dada teacher meant nothing good, but denying that a raising thread like Voldemort does not exist is just ridiculous to him. "What an ignorant toad," said Naruto next to him, and slumped back in his chair and crossed his arms in front of his chest. On his lips rested a cute pout which made Sasuke's heart beat faster. Looking away, he put his hand on his chest, trying to get his heart to calm down, which didn't quite go as planned. The lesson ended with Sasuke questioning his sanity, or extremely bored Naruto, and detention for Harry. "Training? Oh my god, Naruto, stop moving so much," said the pink-haired kunoichi as she watched her companion swing from left to right on his chair as they sat in the common room of their house, originally trying to get their homework for tomorrow done. "But I'm bored. Nothing happened so far, and even the lesson is uninteresting. I can't understand why we are not allowed to use our wands. I mean, what do we have them for in the first place?" replied the blonde, who picked up his quill and started to draw little faces on his paper. Sakura rolled her eyes at her friend's childish behavior before she took Naruto's quill out of his fingers and put it down on the table. "Come with me," said Sakura, and stood up from her chair, putting all her papers and quill in her bag. Naruto looked at her with a confused look on his face, but did the same and quickly stood up. After that, they began walking out of the common room, further down the long corridors of the castle. After a few minutes, they arrived before a wooden door in the middle of a random corridor. Sakura raised her hand and gently knocks on the door. Just a second later, it swung open and revealed the tall gray-haired man with his usual mask covering his face. My dear students, what can I help you with on such a lovely day?" said Kakashi while giving his eyes smile to two of his students. "Kakashi-sensei, I wanted to ask for permission to train. We were sitting still the whole day, and Naruto wouldn't be able to sleep tonight with how hyper he is. Also, we have to stay in form," replied the young girl to her teacher's question. As Naruto heard these words leaving the kunoichi's mouth, his eyes immediately lit up. It's true. He was hyper, and his butt was beginning to get numb from all the sitting. He was just not used to it. Normally he would be running around the village or train with his friends. That would be a good idea, indeed. Don't worry about it. I actually asked Professor Dumbledore for a place where we could train without getting disturbed, said Kakashi. How about you two find Sasuke and change into more comfortable clothes? We will meet up at Hagrid's hut. Hi, Sensei, chanted both of them before Kakashi closed his door and Naruto and Sakura began searching for their remaining teammate. Where do you think is Sasuke now? Asked Sakura as she stopped walking, not knowing the location of Sasuke's whereabouts. He said that he wanted to go to the library after the tour, don't you remember? Said Naruto and confidently strutted down the hallway on his way to the Sasuke. Naruto, the library is the other way. The blunt quickly turned around on his heels and continued walking in the opposite direction. I knew that. Sakura just shook her head while a small smile made its way on her lips. She then began following her teammate. When they arrived at the library, they could see students from all years and houses sitting at the large tables between the many rows of books, probably doing their school work. Both of them walked through the rows in search for the raven-haired shinobi only to find him sitting on a desk near one of the windows. He was alone, one of his strands of black hair tugged behind his ear and his eyes glued to the page in front of him. Hey Sasuke, said Naruto and threw himself into the chair next to the boy while putting his arm around his shoulders. What are you reading? Sasuke just clicked with his tongue and closed the book. Sakura took the opportunity, sat opposite of him and put the book in front of her. Magic communities all around the world. Why are you reading this? She asked confused and put the book back in front of Sasuke. I just wanted to know if the wizards had any information about us and if they did how much they knew, answered the raven-haired boy. And have you found something? This time it was Naruto who asked, still clinging to Sasuke who didn't seem to mind it that much. Not really. They just shortly mentioned something but it lacks of details, so we don't have to worry much, said Sasuke. Why are you even here? I thought you wanted to spend some time with these wizards from your house. We all had school work to do and the tour already took longer than expected. Also we asked Kakashi, we will have a training session in a few minutes. You in? Asked Sakura smirking. She knew that he wouldn't say no to that. Why not, was all he said before he stood up and put the book back to where it belonged. Let's go. Naruto and Sakura didn't have to be told twice as they both stood up from their chairs, making them screech a bit which earned them a pointed look from the librarian. They quietly apologized and then left the library together to change and meet up again at Hagrid's hut. Meanwhile, the Golden Trio walked out from their little hideout behind all the books. They didn't really intended to listen to the conversation between the exchange students but they couldn't help but feel curious about them, especially Hermione. What do you think they meant with information about them and a training session? Aren't they wizards just like us? Asked Harry confused. He didn't really know what to think of them, especially the black-haired foreigner. During the tour he didn't talk much, he wasn't the friendliest guy on earth but he also didn't give any of them a reason to dislike him. Sakura told them he would be introverted and he was since he only opened his mouth to make some remarks towards Naruto. But Harry could tell that they weren't meant in a bad way. Actually the raven-haired Slytherin looked at the blonde in a quite fond way which surprised Harry the first time he saw it. Who knows? I mean they are from a different country. Maybe because of their culture or something, said Ron who definitely didn't intend to spend his whole afternoon in the library spying on someone again. It did not help that the dinner was near and his stomach is crying out for food. Both Harry and Hermione shrugged their shoulders even though the Young Witch still had a calculating look on her face. Come on Naruto, you are faster than that, shouted Kakashi across the clearing while continuing to attack his student. After they met up at Hagrid's hut, they followed Kakashi down a path that led them deeper into the woods. From the opening ceremony they knew that the forest was forbidden for the students but their teacher seemed like he couldn't care less. They started with a little warm-up, running around the clearing they found in between the endless rows of trees. While doing so, they could feel themselves relaxing. All the time they were surrounded by foreign things, it was good to do something familiar to them. They then split their group. Sakura decided that she wanted to practice the channeling of her chakra to use it for her punches to make them even more powerful and destructive but also more precise. Sasuke started off with training with his sword and kunais. He proceeds to test some of his ninjutsu skills. Naruto and Kakashi on the other hand paired up. The two began with an harmless spar which slowly developed into a full fight. Kakashi often nags Naruto for his silly decisions in battle, so he started teaching him battle strategies a while ago that may help in future fights. Kakashi wasn't dumb, he knew how powerful Naruto can be and he made it his task to help him understand his powers better and use them in a proper way. Naruto was clearly getting frustrated. No matter what he did, in the end his sensei always kicked his ass during the fight. As consequence of the frustration, also anger started to boil in him. But he knew that he couldn't let go of all of it, fearing that just one wrong move could trigger the Kyuubi once again. The thought alone sent a shiver down his back. With frustrated sigh, the Jinchuriki sank to the ground, rubbing his hands over his face. "I know that you are scared of the power inside of you, Naruto," says Kakashi as he approaches his student and crouches down beside him, "but this fear does nothing but hold you back. If you want to get stronger, you have to find a way of losing this fear and controlling the Kyuubi. I fear this is the only way. What if I can't do it? What if I lose control again and hurt someone? The students here are Sakura and Sasuke. Or you? What do I do then?" asked Naruto, his blue eyes now staring hopelessly into the gray one of his sensei. "Bold of you to assume that you could hurt me, Dobi. If you leash out, we will help you gaining control again. Stop thinking that you are alone, Yuzuru and Tomkacha," says Sasuke, not looking him in the eye, clearly embarrassed from the words he just said, but as he allowed himself to look at the blonde he couldn't help but let a small smile resting on his face. Naruto smiled at the black-haired boy so brightly that his blue eyes disappeared into half-moons, but the pressure on his heart still there. "Sasuke is right. You have us. So give your best, Naruto, and don't worry about us, we can take anything," says Sakura and gives him a reassuring smile. Kakashi puts a hand on his shoulder and squeezes it slightly before standing up again and holding out his hand for Naruto to take. "Let's continue. We don't have much time, the dinner starts soon." And with these words, all four of them start to move again. This time Naruto did not hold back, and at the end of the training session he managed to get Kakashi to the ground with one of his strongest punches. The large doors of the great hall swung open in the middle of dinner. The students and teachers stopped their chatter and looked at the four people standing in the entry. All of them had their required clothes back on, but their hair was still messy, and on Naruto's cheek you could see a few scratches while a few bruises started to develop on Sakura's knuckles. The four shinobi, well except Sasuke, sent apologetic looks to the headmaster. Kakashi then made his way across the room to the teacher's table while Sasuke went to the Slytherin table with his usual stoic face but still pleased, and Naruto and Sakura to the Gryffindor table where they earned some weird looks and were asked questions, neither of them answered, from their classmates. Hogsmeade. I want to remind all of you that this Saturday the first trip to Hogsmeade takes place. For that all students of the 5th year will meet up in the courtyard. Please do not forget the permission slips, said Professor McGonagall at the end of today's Transfiguration lesson. Shortly after she finished talking, she ended the lesson for today and all the students in the classroom began stuffing their books into their school bags. "Any Sakura, isn't it exciting? We finally get to see something different than this old castle," said Naruto, who made his way to the potions classroom in the dungeons together with his pink-haired teammate. Potions was the last lesson for today. They had it with Slytherin and Naruto couldn't wait to plan tomorrow's events with Sasuke. "I wanted to ask Kakashi-sensei if we could get a bit money. Who knows, maybe we find something interesting to buy," shared Sakura her thoughts. She hoped to find similar shops like in Diagon Alley. Their first week at Hogwarts slowly come to an end. Until now nothing remotely interesting happened. No enemy attacks, no dangerous magical creatures, just relatively boring lessons and lots of bickering between the students. The three young shinobi spend most of their time in the library, trying to learn as much as possible about the wizarding world. Even Naruto had been motivated to read books. Sometimes Harry, Hermione and Ron decided to join them. Sakura could tell that the three were eager to find out information about them. Whenever they spoke in their native language, Hermione's eyebrows are drawn together, and it is obvious that she wanted to ask many questions. The three foreigners knew that they couldn't give away much information, so whenever a question is unavoidable they tell the bare minimum or twist the truth just a little bit. Like 2 days ago when the 6 of them were sitting at one of the tables in the library. "Whoa, dragons are so cool," said Naruto as he closed the book about magical creatures he was reading. "I wish I could see one in reality." Believe me when I say you don't, replied Ron, who was sitting next to Harry and drew something on a piece of pergament. And why that? Why? Are you kidding? They are huge and spit fire. Just one bite and you are gone. How can you not be afraid, replied Ron, and loomed at the blond boy as if he was insane for not fearing them. Not that it bothered said boy much, as he was already sitting next to a fire-spitting, dangerous yet unbothered man. You can ask Harry, he fought one. Naruto's eyes widened in excitement. No way. You really were near one. The Uzumaki leaned over table and nearly shoved his face into Harry's as he looked at him with his large blue eyes. Well, I guess. It was a task at the Tree Wizard tournament, answered Harry. What's the Tree Wizard tournament? Asked Sakura, who now also seemed interested in the topic. Sasuke, too, looked slightly into their direction, signaling that he was listening. It's a tournament between 3 wizarding schools. Our school was the host. The tournament consists of 3 tasks and stretches over nearly the whole school year. For every school there is one student taking part in it, and whoever wins brings glory upon themselves and their school, as well as getting a lot of money, explained Hermione when she saw how Harry shifted uncomfortable in his chair after being asked. Sounds like the Chunin exams, don't think, Sasuke. Except we do not get paid. How unfair, said Naruto while looking at his best friend and pouting. HN was all Sasuke added to the conversation before getting back to reading a book about different wizarding communities and traditions. Chunin exams. What is that? Asked Hermione curiously. Sakura looked at Naruto with a little bit uncertainty while Sasuke just shook his head at Naruto. Said blonde just realized what he said and scratched the back of his head nervously. Giving just a bit information wouldn't hurt, right? The Chunin exams are competitions where people take place in to climb up in the ranks. Think of it as graduating into a new school year, said Sasuke, annoyed at his friend's hesitant behavior, which made it so obvious that they were hiding something. Naruto and Sasuke, for example, took place in it in the beginning of the year, added Sakura, a little more confident, and she got back to reading to signal that this conversation is over. Hermione couldn't say that she was satisfied with the amount of information she got, but it was a beginning. She didn't know why she was so desperate to find out everything about the foreign students, but she would find out what they were hiding, so much was sure. When Saturday rolled around, Naruto was the most excited he has been since the school year began. Most students currently sat in the Great Hall and ate their breakfast. Like the last few days, Naruto and Sakura sat with Ron, Hermione, and Harry pretty much at the end of the table. They all were trying to avoid the attention as much as they could. Harry's supposed lies were still a current issue. But how good can you avoid attention when you are the boy who sits with a hyperactive boy and a pink-haired girl with a fable of hitting said boy's head whenever he said something unbelievably stupid? Harry didn't want to admit it, but he was kind of scared of Sakura. Not that she was overly intimidating, no, in most cases she was rather calm and acted rationally, but sometimes she let her temper win the best of her. Yesterday she caused a table to break in half after a slider and decided to make fun of her hair and forehead. After the breakfast, the students of the 5th year began to slowly gather on the courtyard. When Sakura and Naruto arrived, their other 2 teammates were already waiting for them. Both, Sasuke and Kakashi, stood a small distance away from the rest, not really talking but rather looking around with an awkward silence between them. Even though it is the end of summer and still early, the sun burned down on them and the air was thick because of the warmth that it was hard to breathe normally. The 4 shinobi hadn't really thought that they needed extra clothes except the school uniforms and their normal outfits. Knowing that it was not the greatest idea to turn up as they normally would, they hinged into fitting clothes. Sasuke wore a black, slightly oversized t-shirt with some white font on the front, a part of it tugged in his loose-fitting dark blue jeans. His hair was just as usual, 2 strands were framing his flawless pale face while the rest of it stood up in the back, how Naruto likes to say, like a duck butt. Said boy wore a bright large orange t-shirt. His black jeans were cuffed at the bottom and his white sneakers were practically glowing in the sun. His unruly blonde hair fell into his eyes as he smiled brightly. With one side of her short pink hair tugged behind her ear and fastened with a hair clipper, Sakura was glad she kept her hair that length as a small breeze blew against her neck. The wide white t-shirt she wore was completely tugged in her light blue short pants, and she also wore some white comfortable shoes. Over her shoulder she had a small bag with money she got from Kakashi and a few kunai and shuriken for savada reasons. Named grey-haired Jounin could think of many other things he would rather do than being one of the teachers that were looking after the horde of students on the trip to Hogsmeade. Over his scarred eyes he had his eye patch, and a black mask covered the lower part of his face as always. The olive-colored short-sleeved shirt he wore was partly tugged into his black pants, with the top button unbuttoned. They ended their short conversation when they saw the Gryffindor trio making their way towards them. Greetings followed, and when Sakura looked up from her bag, after controlling whether she had everything with her or not, she could see the entire female population of the fifth year staring at her male teammates while nearly drooling. Honestly, Sakura couldn't really blame them. They did look handsome, but making it that obvious made her chuckle to herself. They were in for a surprise, because if they truly believed that they had a chance with the totally not romantic and quite antisocial and too old Kakashi or her other two friends, who practically radiated gay energy, then they were blinder and more naive than she thought. "Come on, we're about to go," said the copy nin while gesturing to the 6 students to start walking, but not before making sure that all shadow clones they created were on their assigned position within the castle. They all walked more at the back of the crowd, with Kakashi being the last to make sure no one was missing. The walk to the small village wasn't long, and on the way Hermione kindly gave some information about the layout of the village and the shops. When they arrived, the crowd began to scatter. Some students straight up walked into one of the bars, others decided to go into shops, and some were just walking around without a real destination in mind. "We will part here. I have an informant to meet regarding the mission. Be careful and watch out for anything suspicious. Here are more opened areas that are not as secured as the Hogwarts grounds. If something's wrong, you know how to call for me," said the teacher to his 3 students before walking away from them, further into the village. "Where is Professor Hatake going?" asked Ron curiously. "He makes sure none of the students cause trouble." "It's his job," replied Sasuke in a dry tone and looked at them with bored eyes. "Right," said Hermione hesitantly before continuing, "Where do we want to go first?" "How about we just start walking, and when we want to go somewhere we just do," answered Sakura and shrugged with her shoulders. The rest nodded while Sasuke let out a usual "Achan" of his. They started moving down one of the paths. Most of the small stores looked welcoming, and sometimes the group stopped in front of a store window. Sakura and Hermione started walking a bit behind the others after some time. "Probably talking about stuff I don't understand," thought Harry. He was glad that his friend found someone she could talk about topics she couldn't with either Ron or Harry. The 4 boys stopped in front of a candy store. Naruto's eyes basically sparkling while he looked at all of the different kinds of sweets that were portrayed ahead of them. They entered the shop, and Sasuke had to constantly remind his blonde friend to not overdo it with the candy or else he would suffer from a sugar high, and Sasuke definitely didn't want to deal with that. During the whole spectacle, Ron and Harry just snickered while buying some sweets for themselves. Sakura then gave Naruto some money, who excitedly walked up to the counter to pay. The group left the store after paying. Naruto happily jumped up and down, and Harry couldn't help but wonder whether he already ate some of the candy or not. Honestly, how can someone be so active? Harry couldn't relate. Naruto didn't see where he was going with all the sudden joy flooding his body till it was too late, and he practically jumped into a stranger who walked in the opposite direction of them and currently rummaged around in his bag. The 2 of them collided, and Naruto fell down while the stranger's bag landed on the ground and items started to fall out. Naruto quickly overcame the shock and started apologizing to the man, who looked like he was in his late 30s. "I'm so sorry, mister, I really am," said Naruto as he kneeled in front of the items and started to pick them up to give the man. "Watch where you are going, boy," growled the man and angrily put the stuff back in his bag. Just as Naruto wanted to pick up the last one, he abruptly stopped. His hand hung just centimeters above the item, and his blue eyes were wide with shock and also confusion. Before he could react, the man took the item and stuffed it back inside the bag. He threw Naruto a nasty glare, which made Sasuke snarl at him, and then walked away. "Hey Dobi, stand up," said Sasuke as he took the blonde's hand to help him up. "Naruto." "Hello. Are you there?" asked the black-haired boy while waving his hand in front of his friend's face. But Naruto didn't react at all. No, all he did was stare forward, because before him laid a Hokage with a crossed-out symbol of Kirigakure. "Danger is near." "Are you absolutely sure, Naruto?" asked the pink-haired girl her blonde friend for the 100th time to make sure that she didn't misheard. said Blunt sat on the wooden chair, his shoulders slumped and his hair casting a shadow over his eyes. Across from him stood Sakura. With her arms she supported herself as she leaned against the table. On his right side sat Sasuke, who was quiet the whole time and stared into nothing. His arms were crossed at his chest and he leaned back in his chair, the light making his hair appear a dark shade of blue. "Yes, I'm 100% sure. I know what I saw," Sakura-chan answered Naruto, still not looking at either of his friends. "But what does a missing nin do so far away from Kirigakyo? I mean, it's not that dumb. Nobody would search here for hen. The question is, how many are there and do they know about us being here?" spoke Sasuke for the first time since he got dragged into the back of the library along with Sakura by Naruto. After the incident in Hogsmeade, Naruto tried to play everything cool to not worry Harry and the others. His two comrades of course noticed that something was not right but waited till Naruto would tell them himself. As soon as they entered Hogwarts, Naruto grabbed Sasuke's and Sakura's hand and took off in direction of the library. Harry, Ron and Hermione just got a mere goodbye and were left standing in the entrance hall with other chattering students, utterly confused. "This is a real problem. I'm going to inform Kakashi-sensei about this. He will probably tell Dumbledore. From now on we have to be careful," said Sakura, quickly made her way to Kakashi. As soon as the girl left, Sasuke turned his head to look at Naruto, who still had his head hung low. A frown made its way on the Raven's face as he looked at his friend. He was not used to him being so gloomy, that was normally his job. Sasuke slowly took the Jinchuriki's hand into his. It was, in contrast to his, warm and fuzzy feeling started flooding through his entire body. When he felt the hand in his, Naruto looked up. His eyes scanned Sasuke's face with a curious look. A small smile built on his lips as he saw the blush on the black-haired boy's face. The faint red made a contrast to the rest on the pale skin. "Don't worry, Yuzuru-kacha. We'll talk with Kakashi and figure something out. It is not said that he will interfere with our mission." Sasuke tried to reassure him. "It did not look like he recognized me or any of us." "If he did, he at least didn't show it," replied Naruto quickly. "Even though it is nearing dinner and the library has barely any students in it, they kept as quiet as possible. I seriously can't believe that pink nightmare. Look how she sits on the table like she owns that place." Growled Ron while a frown rested on his face and stabbed his fork into the chicken on his plate. They were all sitting in the Great Hall, eating dinner when Professor Dumbledore announced that from next week on, Hatake Kakashi will give classes in fitness, health and battle strategies. To say the students were excited were an underestimate, as the whole room was filled with excited chatter. The good mood was destroyed not much later when Umbridge strutted into the hall and sat down on the teacher's table. Much to the dismay of Naruto and Sakura and Sasuke, but nobody needed to know that, she gave their sensei some nasty glares which simply got ignored by the grey-haired man. "Calm down, Ron. Nobody likes her, but it is better to lay low and not get into trouble with her," replied Hermione and took the fork out of the poor chicken. "Hermione is right. She is a problem, but who knows what she is capable of," said Sakura. She was excited for the classes her sensei was going to teach. But that excitement was quickly overshadowed by worry as she remembered the conversation Kakashi and her had. "A missing nin, you say?" asked the Jounin and scratched his mask-covered chin, from Kirigakyo. "Hi, sensei." Naruto said it couldn't be mistaken. Luckily the man didn't seem to recognize us. That is indeed worryingly. It could be a coincidence, but the risk is too high. The informant I met also didn't mention anything about Shinobi in this area. What are we going to do now, sensei? I'm going to talk with Dumbledore. You, Naruto and Sasuke will stay on Hogwarts ground for the time being, also make sure Harry does not leave. We don't know what the Shinobi wants here, spoke Kakashi. Kakashi-sensei. Do you think it has something to do with the Akatsuki? Asked Sakura, her gaze fixed on the ground. I fear it does, replied Kakashi, his voice laced with worry for his student. One reason for Tsunade to accept the mission was of course the high payment, but also the fact that they would be able to hide Naruto from the looming danger that is Akatsuki. Knowing the Uzumaki, he would probably not want to be kept hidden and fight, but it was too dangerous and Naruto too important. Any harm on him could have massive consequences. Please don't tell Naruto for now, said Kakashi as he made his way to Dumbledore's office. But sensei, if Naruto found out that we kept it from him he would dash. The kunoichi was cut off by Kakashi. Sakura, I know that you are worried about Naruto's well-being, but telling him now would do more harm than good. We have to stabilize his relationship with the Kyuubi first, or he will be hindered by anger and fear, and, in the worst case, be taken over by the Kyuubi, said Kakashi and continued walking, informed Sasuke on what is going on. From next week on we will train more to ensure Naruto's safety and the one of everyone around him. Hi, sensei, replied Sakura in a defeated tone and made her way to the Great Hall to meet up with her comrades while Kakashi went to Dumbledore. Hey Sakura-chan, is everything okay? Asked Naruto as he waved his hand in front of the girl's face. Yeah, I just spaced out a bit, she answered. Hey Naruto, next week we got more intensive training with sensei. Naruto blinked with surprise, but soon excitement overtook. Great. Wait, I'm gonna tell Sasuke Temi. With these words the blonde jumped up from his seat and made his way over to the Slytherin table. At the same time, in the Forbidden Forest, hidden by large trees, a man, not older than 30, sat in a relative large cave. His eyes were shut and his eyebrows furrowed in concentration. His hands were formed into a seal. Not a sound could be heard outside, but it looked different inside the man's head. In his mindscape he sat before another person who was hidden in the shadows. He is here. The Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails is with the British wizarding community, he is no mistaken, said the man, his hand shaking with fear for the person in front of him. Thank you, Kanaki. Make sure to stay out of their sight. It could get tricky now that they know you are here, said the person. The deep voice echoing in the mindscape. I will send someone to take care of it. Make sure to be ready to receive them. Understood, sir. Kanaki looked up again after bowing slightly. A gasp left his mouth as his eyes met a pair of purple eyeballs that were secluded in circles. The Rinnegan, thought Kanaki as he left his mindscape and awoke in the dark and cold cave. Health, fitness and feelings. Maybe if he hadn't decided to take a nap during the free period, he wouldn't be running over the Hogwarts grounds like a maniac, desperately trying to be on time for class to begin. Nonetheless, the first class of Kakashi had already begun and of course, the master student he is, Naruto, was late. The hope that maybe his sensei held on to his own habit of constantly not being on time was shattered as he arrived on the large green area near the lake where the class took place. Kakashi decided to make the students endure practical lesson on their first period of that subject rather than endless and boring theory that was comparable to history of Meiji lessons by Professor Benz. At least Kakashi thought so, but he was an elite shinobi, so you really can't take him serious in that matter. Kakashi noticed his students' arrival but decided to not comment on it and instead watched his other temporary students struggle with the simple task of a fitness test even an academy student could complete. From the first day on, he could tell that even though wizards could do incredible things, thanks to their wands, they had terrible physical strength and stamina. Following that understanding of the situation, the Jounin decided to upgrade the physical strength of a wizard to increase the chance of survival in battle. Even though many students asked why they would need this kind of knowledge, the simple explanation, that if they would lose their wand during a battle for whatever reasons, death would stand at their doorsteps or major injuries were assured, shut them up. Harry was excited, to say the least. With the looming threat of Voldemort hanging like a dark cloud over his head, the extra training made him feel a little more reassured. He didn't think that a simple punch in the flat face or kick in his balls would stop Voldemort from his evil plans, but it was always better to be prepared, wasn't it? The only thing that made the class a little more difficult than necessary was the fact that the Gryffindors were partnered with the Slytherins. When would Dumbledore finally realize that putting the rival houses together in a class where they literally learned how to fight and be fit is not the perfect solution? Harry didn't know, but he hoped that no one had to be seriously injured first. Draco didn't really know what to expect from the additional class that was taught by one of the strange newcomers, but when he thought about health or fitness, fighting and battle strategies were not on the program. Not that he was complaining or anything. The headmaster probably only named the class like he did to keep Umbridge away. The ministry would definitely start a riot if they'll ever find out. The blonde-haired boy looked to his left. Just a few meters away from him stood his dark-haired enemy with his two friends and the 3 exchange student. It was now common sight for the school to see a Slytherin hanging around Gryffindors, and if Draco is honest with himself, he is happy that someone broke the ice between the two houses. Don't get him wrong, the two still were in a constant conflict, but now it was more like a Cold War. Neither side tried anything. And Draco dared to hope. He dared to hope for a chance to seek the company of a certain dark-haired boy with bright green eyes, round glasses and a lightning bolt scar on his forehead. While the Malfoyer was daydreaming, the rest of the students were listening as Kakashi explained the next task to them. All right. As I told you before, you all lack stamina, so we will concentrate on building this up for now. You will start with a sequence of exercises, and at the end of the lesson you will run one round around the lake. That is good enough for the first time. Groaning could be heard from the students as they took distance from each other to have enough room and began with their exercise. I can't believe we have to do this too, grunted Naruto as he began yet another push-up. Don't be so lazy, Naruto. It's not like it's going to kill you, said Sakura, who was also busy. Sasuke just silently pushed through the program in hope of a fast ending. He was always ready for training, but he thought more about a nice spa, not something they already had to endure in their academy days. The lesson was over rather quickly and the students walked back into the castle to continue the rest of the school day. Well, everyone except the three young shinobi and their teacher, who discussed their next training session that will take place tonight, quickly. We will meet up at the clearing from last time. I hope you'll remember where it is. Don't be late. With these last words, the Jounin disappeared in a cloud of smoke. The three Chunin made their way back to the castle to join the rest of the class. The school day was over, not as fast as some would wish, but eventually it came to an end with an amount of homework and a few headaches here and there. It was dinner time, and once again the whole student's body was gathered in the great hall. Harry and his friends sat in silence for once and ate their food while the chatter around them just increased. But Harry wasn't paying attention to anything in the moment other than the blonde, skinny male that sat at the Slytherin table. For days his thoughts wandered to the Malfoy, often even without him realizing, which resulted in far too many potions exploding. Harry didn't know why, didn't know when it happened, but he was certain that it could only mean extra trouble in his already mess-up life. He thought about speaking with Ron and Hermione about it, but he didn't find the right time and probably wouldn't know the right words either to describe his feelings for the blonde Slytherin. The boy who lived noticed that he was staring as the now familiar grey eyes met his green ones, and instant panic crashed like a gate wave through his whole body and his cheeks heated up. Harry quickly avoided the confused and curious eyes of Malfoy and picked at the food on his plate. Not really being hungry, he looked to his right, Naruto, who looked at him with a raised eyebrow and a small smirk on his face. Harry's cheeks turned redder than Gaara's hair, which made the Uzumaki chuckle. Suddenly said boy felt an elbow getting buried in his side and his head turned towards Sakura. Eat up, we are meeting with Sensei soon. Hi, murmured Naruto and shoved the last bit of food in his mouth before standing up together with his companion. We are already going to the common room. See you guys later, was all Sakura said to the trio. They quickly left the great hall and met up with Sasuke, who already stood next to the large doors. As soon as they were out of sight, Naruto created 3 shadow clones, hinged 2 of them into Sasuke and Sakura, and then sent them on their way to the common rooms. The 3 of them arrived at the meeting point a few minutes later, where their sensei already stood, leaned against a tree. Now that we are all here, let's begin, said the Jounin. Let's warm up a bit with a little spar. Sasuke and Sakura go together, and Naruto, you go against me, all right? Asked Kakashi his students. He knew that they were not really his anymore, but he can't bring himself to address them differently. Hi, Sensei, confirmed his pupils. The spar didn't last long and it was nothing serious, but Sasuke had to admit that the punches Sakura threw confidently were getting nastier the more time passed. Soon they once again stood together in a circle in the middle of the clearing while Kakashi began to explain the plan for today's session. Sasuke, we will concentrate on your Manjikyu Sharingan from now on. Perfecting it slowly, and your Susanoo too. It will be one of your most powerful weapons. Since you now possess the eternal Manjikyu Sharingan, you also don't have to worry about getting blind, said Kakashi cheerfully, and added in his mind, lucky bastard. HN. Naruto, the work with the Kyuubi is dangerous and I would rather do it back in Konoha where it's in slightly safer surrounding, but we have to work with what we got. To ensure more safety, I requested that Yamato will assist us. He will most likely arrive in a day, he continued. Sounds like a plan, Databayo. Sakura, your chakra control is perfect and your punches get more powerful each time, but I hoped we could try something new. I plan to find out your chakra element to strengthen your abilities in ninjutsu. Naruto will make the paper test with you. I hope you still remember it, Naruto, and after I'm done with Sasuke we will start. All right, sensei, she said, exited. Kakashi then took a piece of paper out of one of the many pockets on the Jounin vest and handed it to Naruto, who then took Sakura and walked to the edge of the clearing to give Kakashi and Sasuke space. It's been a while since I last used the Sharingan, murmured Sasuke. It is good to not overuse it. Even though you can't turn blind anymore, it still could be painful, and for some it's a disturbing sight to see your eyes bleeding, replied Kakashi. Even though he is not an Uchiha and only possess one Sharingan eye, Kakashi wants to help Sasuke with his. He knows his knowledge is limited, but who else is gonna do it if not him? Your ability is Enten, right? The control over the Amaterasu flames, continued Kakashi. Yes. I was working on ways to use Amaterasu differently than just to burn things down with simple flames. For example, combining it with Kaidori, said Sasuke while looking at his outstretched hands. And Yosusuno? It is still just the ribcage and arm, but the last time I managed to give it some part of armor. But I was too exhausted already to maintain it for any longer. Then I say we start with that. Right now you are at your full power. Sasuke took a few steps away from his teacher and closed his eyes. He concentrated on his chakra and blended out everything else around him. He concentrated on emotions like anger that boiled deep inside his heart and tried to blend out the immense pain that took over his whole body. He learned that negative feelings accelerate the building of his Susanoo. After a few seconds his eyes snapped open and the familiar color and shape of his Sharingan stared back at Kakashi while a ribcage and arm of the purple Susanoo surrounded his entire body. All right, it looks stable. Put more into it. But not too much, we take it easy. The Uchiha did as told and slowly it took on a more human shape. Its slightly unstable body was covered in armor and a chakra sword rested in his hand. As far as I can tell, it looks good. I'm still surprised you could awaken it, heard not many could to it, but at the same time I'm not, said the Hokage and carefully watched the boy before him. How do you feel? Like shit. All right, Kakashi looked on the watch around his wrist. It has been nearly 5 minutes, longer than before I assume. Do you want to stop? No, I can do it, reassured the Uchiha. The pain he felt everywhere in his body increased and he felt the blood running down his cheek as his eyes burned like they were set on fire. Sasuke panted hard and decided that enough was enough and dissolved the Susanoo. His hands clenched at each side of his body in anger and disappointment. Don't be so hard on yourself, Sasuke. Susanoo is a difficult technique. Let's work on your Enten instead, said Kakashi and put his hand on Sasuke's shoulder. HN was all the black-haired boy said before he started to walk away. You can start Sakura's training now. I can do the rest alone. All right, if you say so. During the time where Sasuke and Kakashi started the training, Naruto stood in front of Sakura and held the piece of paper he got from the Hokage in his hand. With that we will find out your chakra affinity, said Naruto excited. If it ignites and turns to ash, it's fire. When it splits in two, wind. Should it wrinkle, lightning. If it turns to dirt and crumbles away, it's earth, and when it turns wet it means water, he explained, proud of himself that he remembered. All right, understood. Let's see, Sakura said and took the paper in her hand. She stared at it nervously and watched as the paper turned damp in her hand and lost its stability. Cool, so it's water, said Naruto. I don't think anyone in our team has this affinity. The pink-haired Kunoichi looked at the paper in awe. The two of them just talked a bit, while waiting for the two other members of the team to finish. After some time Kakashi made his way over to them and Naruto decided to leave the two alone and keep Sasuke some company. And how did it go? It's water, sensei. Congratulations, Sakura. Sadly we won't be able to do much today. It's better if you are surrounded by water, so we have to change to the lake for an effective training. And we have to be discreet about it. It's fine, sensei, she said. Would you spar with me as close up? Sure thing. I'm sure Naruto is keeping Sasuke busy at this moment. A trademark smile stole itself on his face as he heard the bickering of his two male students behind his back. Naruto climbed through the window into the dorm room after he made sure it was empty inside. The shadow clone that sat on the bed dissolved itself and informed the real Naruto about a conversation he had with Harry and Ron as the two entered the room an hour ago. He quickly showered and changed into a pair of pajamas as it was already quite late. As soon as he lay down on his bed, the door opened and his roommates entered the dorm. All of them looked exhausted and groaned as they sat down on their beds. "I'm happy today is over," said Dean as he massaged his shoulder. "Yeah. I'm going to sleep like a baby," yawned Seamus and stretched, which caused his bones to crack and everyone in the room to cringe at the sound. "Professor Hatake really knows no mercy. And all the homework we had to do in charms. It feels like my head is going to split in two," groaned Ron. "How come you don't look like death itself?" Naruto asked Neville curiously. "Well, what you experienced today was nothing. Wait till Kakashi-sensei get all worked up," grinned the blonde at the boys. Another wave of groans and complaints echoed through the room while Naruto laughed brightly at their misery. As the boys all stood before the sink in the bathroom to brush their teeth, Naruto took his chance and turned to Harry, who waited till the bathroom was less crowded. "You seem to stare at Malfoy a lot these days. Wasn't he supposed to be your sworn enemy or something?" snickered the blonde. "I don't know what you are talking about," replied Harry, who turned as red as the curtains. "Oh, come on. Your attention is on him pretty often for it not to be something." "I don't understand it myself, okay," said Harry, not really sure of what to say. "You don't understand how to feel about him." "Yes," confirmed Harry, "I am supposed to hate him, right? We are not friends and he's not even nice to me, so why do I seem to like him of all people?" "I know how you feel," murmured Naruto. Harry's head snapped up at this reply. "You know, Sasuke and we had many difficulties. I believe he hated me and at first we didn't really got along. We were just too different, but I still thought of him as my friend. Some pretty messed up shit happened and in the end I realized that he thought of me as a friend too, maybe his only one. I think the cause was our shitty communication and childhood trauma," thought Naruto. "You just talked about it." "Yes. Well, I did most of the talking. You saw how Sasuke is, but it helped. It looks like everything had to become bad before it got better," explained Naruto. "And do you like him like a friend or more?" asked Harry curiously. He wondered just what exactly went down between the two, but he figured that it was not his business and that it was an insensitive topic in general. "At first I thought I did everything I did because he was the first friend I ever had, but I figured that it was not really what I felt and it took me some time to accept it. So yes, I think that I'm actually in love with Sasuke," said Naruto in a soft tone, not wanting anyone else to hear. Harry's eyes widened slightly at this confession, but a smile soon took the place of his shocked expression. He wanted to say something else, but the bathroom door opened and the others came tumbled out of it. Most of them literally fell in their bed and instantly asleep while Ron looked at them. "Why are you two so red?" he asked, confused while his eyes narrowed slightly. "It's nothing. Go to sleep or else you won't get up in the morning," replied Harry and made his way into the bedroom. Ron just turned off the lights except the small lamp beside Harry's bed and tucked himself in. "Night," he murmured and then fell asleep too. Naruto followed his example, happy that he didn't have to patrol today. Home is not a place. Dream of flashback. The back was pressed against the cool concrete of a piece of remaining wall from the Uchiha clan hideout. The clan symbol stared mockingly at the two Uchiha who stood under it. The younger one stood caged, his black eyes wide with terror and fear in them. His body dirty and wounded while his shirt was long lost in the fight. Walking towards him was his older brother, more wounded and trembling on his feet as blood spilled out between his lips. His eyes blackened and fixed on the ground before him as he walked. Around him, the armored body of an orange-red Susanoo with which he survived the deadly attack of his younger brother. The little brother looked around, trying to make out a way to escape. But his body won't move, like his feet were glued to the ground. All he could do was watch. Watch as the cause of his doom, of his hatred and anger, of his constant nightmares, came closer. Is that it? Didn't I promised him to come back home? Home? Naruto? The older brother raised his burned and scratched arm, blood which he coughed up is dropping from his fingertips. His fingers were nearing the younger's face. Eyes still wide, he stared as they were coming to get them. Suddenly he stood just an arm length away. His fingers mere centimeters from his eyes as they came even closer. The two blooded fingertips collided with the younger brother's forehead. The older had a small blooded smile resting on his lips. "Forgive me, Sasuke. There won't be a next time." The fingers glided down the face, leaving a trail of blood. The older brother fell forward, head connecting with the concrete wall. His body met the ground with an heavy thud. His black eyes dull, the last bits of life dissolved as they stared into nothingness. The little brother felt all his energy and adrenaline leaving his body as he fell, too, to the ground next to his dead brother. With his mind fuzzy and body heavy, his eyes closed in exhaustion. "Naruto, I'm sorry. I don't know if I will be able to hold my promise." "Brother." With heavy panting, Sasuke sat up in the large bed. His eyes blood red as his Sharingan awoke itself. An hollow feeling made its way into his heart as he stared at the green curtains that surrounded the bed. It took some time before he remembered where exactly he was. The bits of the dream, or more of the memory, were fresh in his mind. He signed and buried his face in his hands. Quickly he deactivated the Sharingan and drew the curtains back to stand up from the soft bed. His eyes automatically drifted to the small lamp that lightened the dorm room in a soft light. At one of the desks in the room sat the young Malfoy. His grey eyes looked at the Uchiha with slight curiosity. He heard him shouting in his sleep, something in Japanese that he didn't understand. He wanted to ask, not that he cared or something, but he bit his tongue as he looked into the cold eyes of Uchiha Sasuke. If looks could kill, he was faster down there than Voldemort could say Avada Kedavra. So he kept silent and watched as the Japanese left the dorm room, not even caring to put on some shoes. Sasuke was walking down the cold corridors of the dungeon. The only reason he didn't walk in front of a wall yet were the torches that hung every few meters and illuminated the way in his superior senses. Nobody else was awake. Neither teachers or students roamed the hallways of Hogwarts. Most of the portraits were snoring as the Uchiha passed by, and just once he saw one of the house ghosts walking through the wall in front of him. But he paid him no mind and walked straight ahead. He didn't have a particular destination in mind, just the goal to clear up his mind a bit. The sudden dream brought back all these feelings he managed to hide for so long. He hadn't talked about what happened that day with anyone. Not even Naruto. It was probably better to talk about your problems, but let's face it, he would never do that out of his own will. So he kept his mouth shut and suffered in the safety of the night where no one was able to see him except Malfoy did, and that was bugging him to no end. Back then, when everything started to go downhill and his family was murdered by his brother, who he always idolized so much, the thought of killing Itachi and getting revenge was the only thing that kept him going. His younger self would be proud of what he did, but he himself now only wished that there was a button he could press to turn back time and just do things right. But he was stuck in this cruel reality that he created while being blinded by hatred. The feeling of regret settled in earlier than he expected, right after Itachi's eyes were drained of the previous shimmer of life. He thought it was because he was alone now, but then Toby happened. The masked man who stood over him as he came back to consciousness in a cave-like surrounding. A torch lightened up the small room. The only thing that could be described as furniture was the wooden table and the mat he was currently laying on. Sasuke only ever heard stories about the mystery Akatsuki member with the orange mask. Nobody really knew anything about him, not his identity, nor the extent of his abilities. So of course Sasuke was wary of him. All he wanted to do was to knock the older man out and get the heck out of there. But like always, life did not go according to plan, and the throbbing pain in his eyes and the rest of his body forced him to stay seated. So he waited till the Akatsuki member finally spoke, and when he did, let me tell you, Sasuke wished that he had died of chakra exhaustion. At first he didn't believe any of the words that left Toby's mouth. The thought that his brother did everything he did, that he murdered his own clan to keep him and the village safe, was not sitting right with him. But on the other hand, it made somewhat sense. His brother was always the kind of person that made no effort in talking about his problems. He rather suffered in the dark, hidden from others' eyes, alone. Suddenly it wasn't impossible for him to believe it all, and Sasuke thinks it's some kind of twisted fate that this new discovery was only the tip of the iceberg. It's all true. Itachi killed every member of the Uchiha clan that night by order of the Hidden Leaf. The way the man said it with such an indifference, as if Sasuke's whole beliefs were not just shattered at the very moment, unsettled him. For a moment Sasuke's body was shaken with unbelievable rage. He felt like he could tear apart everyone and everything, and the only thing that occupied his mind was the all-too-familiar revenge. Because if what Toby said was true, then the village was the very reason his whole life went down the drain, the reason his brother had to suffer so greatly. Inside he was furious, he was burning like the black flames of Amaterasu. On the outside, on the other hand, he tried to stay cool. The last thing he wanted was to let his guard down in front of a man like Toby. And when Sasuke didn't answer the ladder, he was left alone, breathing heavily, sitting on the old worn-out mat and rethinking everything that happened till now. He was so focused on his own thoughts that he didn't even consider what he would do as soon as he was healed. He was gonna leave, that much was clear, but what happens after that? Naruto was probably waiting, or not, who knows, but the thought of returning to the village made him sick in the stomach. During his stay in the cave, or whatever the place was he stayed in, he lost every sense of time. He never saw the sun, and a clock didn't existed in the room he saw for a while now. He was pretty much healed by now. The only thing different from before was his eyesight. Everything he saw was blurry, and it took him some time to focus on certain things. He figured that these were the side effects of the overuse of the Mangekyou Sharingan. It was the next day, way past midnight, when Sasuke decided to leave the housing of the Akatsuki member for good. Living with Orochimaru for years, he wasn't new to the lifestyle of living underground. The snakes' hideouts were built in such complex ways that even the lackeys got lost in them more than often. It was not different here, except Sasuke didn't have time to explore the whole thing and find a way out. He had to hurry because running into Toby, or Madara, or whatever the man goes by, was at the very bottom of his list of things he wanted to do today. Every corridor looked the same, stone walls and an earthy floor, torches were lit, and every few meters a lonely door appeared. Sasuke's senses were sharpened, his Sharingan activated, and his hand resting on the hilt of his sword he found in the far corner of the room. With every step he took and every sound that was made, his heart speeded up. It was not until the hallway in front of him parted that he stopped. He thought for a second and decided to head to the left while trying his best to muffle his steps. To his dismay, the hallway ended with a wooden door. It was the only one he saw since he chose this path, so it must either be unimportant as hell or of great importance. The young Uchiha didn't know what he expected when he opened the damn door. Maybe a weapon arsenal or just a janitor chamber, but certainly not a room with a nearly 5-meter high ceiling in which dozens of shelves stood against the walls reaching from the bottom to the top. On every single one of them stood even more glass containers with eyes that swam in a clear liquid. He tried very hard not to be weirded out, but as he recognized that all the eyes possessed the Sharingan, gulped. Every glass was labeled with a name, and if the last week or so wasn't bad enough, most of them were familiar to him. When he saw one with the name Uchiha Fugaku, a feeling of nausea hit him. As he read one that said Uchiha Itachi, he wanted to vomit right here and there. At the moment he couldn't quite grasp the meaning behind all of this. Behind the eyes of his clan members, eyes that now decorated the room. It was obvious that he should have never seen this, but he did, and he was even more determined to leave as fast as he could. The eyes were probably collected after the massacre. How Toby got the bodies he didn't even need to know. It practically screamed of Danzo. Toby also possessed the Mangekyou Sharingan. Said man must use them for transplantation in case his eyesight got bad after a while. Sasuke didn't think the world could get even more fucked up, yet he was surprised every day, and he was honestly so sick of it. The sudden noise of a door slamming shut echoed through the empty hallways all the way to Sasuke, who quickly turned away from his brother's eyes and looked around the room. As soon as he snapped out of his daze, he remembered what his original goal was. For a quick second he hesitated before grabbing the jar with the 2 eyeballs in it and securely held it in his arms so it would not break. Then he began to run down the hallway he came from, down the right path this time, and he hoped dearly that he would not be stopped by anyone. For a short moment he thought he heard footsteps behind him, and he hurried himself to run even faster. Like a ray of light he zoomed down the many corridors, sometimes turning left, sometimes right, or staying on his path. Every turn he took was decided by the feeling of his gut, reeling more instinctively than logically. It felt like hours when finally a small square of light appeared at the end of the hallways. His legs luckily did not start to ache yet, so he increased his level of speed and practically flew out of the opening. The sharp sunlight hit him full force and blinded him momentarily, but he didn't even thought about stopping now. In front of him, the woods started and he ran straight in, hiding in the shadows of the trees. Later he found a small river and followed it, in hope of finding a village where he could find out his exact location. It was a few hours later when he arrived at a small village. Only a few shops were still open, and from time to time he saw drunk civilians heading home from a bar. He quickly put the hood of his cloak over his raven hair to hide his features a bit better, even though it was really not difficult to identify him as an Uchiha. He roamed through the streets for a while trying to find someone that could help him. He passed by an hostel, and as much as he was tempted to stop and take a break, he declined that thought immediately. Even though he could think of better places to go to than Konoha, he still wanted to let Naruto know that he was alive, that he kept his promise and did not betray him once again. Later that day he found a fitting accommodation for the night. The owner was a nice old lady who gave him a map of the area for orientation, and with the knowledge that he was just a day's trip away from Konoha, he went to sleep on the uncomfortable wooden bed. Konoha looked the same as always when he arrived at the gates. The streets were buzzing with laughing children and civilians that did their grocery shopping. Shinobi flew over the rooftops with immense speed, and vendors' voices praised their goods so people will buy them. It was a familiar scenery, but for Sasuke it felt like he was watching everything through a stranger's eyes. It was not a new information that he wasn't the biggest fan of Konoha, but the immense hatred that he felt before was washed away the moment he saw the blonde mop of hair in the crowd. The village his brother protected laid bare before him. That all these people lived without knowing what price had to be paid for them to live mostly unbothered and secluded from the dangerous world of Shinobi, Sasuke couldn't help but feel jealous. The Uchiha couldn't figure out the exact way to approach Naruto, who was still blissfully unaware of the other's presence as he looked at every shop on the street. His hands rested in the pockets of his pants, but the typical smile full of sunshine was nowhere in sight. So Sasuke waited. Hoped that Naruto would finally meet his gaze, but the other just stubbornly looked everywhere but straight forward. It was not until he bumped into him that he lifted his eyes and stared at the older in wonder. "Sasuke," he stuttered. "Naruto?" His voice was calm and did not show the raging storm of thoughts and emotions inside him. "You, Temi," the blonde began to shout, "where have you been? We were searching for you for days. Bahn said you probably will not return because you." Naruto, I would any. Sasuke couldn't even finish his sentence as strong arms wrapped around him so tightly it knocked all air out of his lungs. "I knew you wouldn't leave," he murmured into his nape, the arms only tightening. "I'm glad you are back again. Don't you dare ever leaving my side, you understand? Hn. Temi, at least show more reaction to what I said." "Whatever. I have to visit the Hokage, making sure she didn't list me as a missing nin again," Sasuke said, wanting to disappear as quickly as possible when he felt all the villagers' stares burying themselves into the back of his head. Too much attention made him uncomfortable. "Then I'll come with you. Just in case Bahn wants to bash in your face and I need to rescue you like a knight in shining armor." Sasuke just tsk'd but chose to reply nothing else. As they walked towards the Hokage tower, the black-haired boy stared at his friend's back. There was nothing special there, but breaking his gaze was nearly impossible. Because was he really going to stay here? And as he watched Naruto walk in front of him, talking excitingly about the events of the past week, Sasuke thought that, yes, he was going to stay. Not because he loved the village and had the will of fire in him, but because his home is here, because Naruto is here, and his brother, who had to shoulder all this pain and suffering alone, deserved a better legacy. It was the middle of the night, probably around 3 or 4 am, when Sasuke settled outside of the window of the dorm Naruto was staying in. He could feel the magic of the castle and the familiar chakra signatures of both Sakura and Kakashi, who roamed around the school grounds. The moon stood high in the night sky, surrounded by thousands and thousands of shining stars that were so far away yet so near. The light of the moon created a halo around his silhouette and casted a shadow on the ground before the window. In one of the beds he could make out bright blonde hair that matched the red colors of the pillow and blanket. No matter how often Sasuke looked at Naruto, he would probably never get tired of seeing these blue eyes and blonde hair, the whiskers on his cheeks and this stupid smile. Even the black and orange outfit he always wore. So he sat there till the sun slowly started to rise at the horizon and illuminated the whole castle in a soft orange glow, and looked over the blonde, who was still unaware of the other, soundly asleep. Only after the first boys started to wake up and they began their morning routine, Sasuke left to return to his dorm room, hoping that Malfoy would already be gone like always so questions wouldn't be asked. Thus a new day began that was filled with attending classes, eating breakfast and lunch, and getting to talk to his teammates at rare opportunities. Not a single trace of the effects the memory caused could be seen on him. So the day went on, and when the image of his brother haunted him and he suddenly appeared in front of him, he acted like his heart did not bleed out and just passed through the illusion that dissolved into nothingness. Suspicions? Kanaki cowered on the polished floor in one of the many rooms of the manor. The sky outside was grey, with thick clouds not letting a singed ray of sunlight pass. The wind picked up and made the trees in front the window dance and the morsewood of the tree trunk creaking. Before a nice-looking leather armchair kneeled a musty-looking man, his head hung low as he listened to his master's talks. His fingernails long and sharp, one finger completely missing, and his face resembling that of a rat with unruly hair framing it. Kanaki was not a person who bowed to anyone but his own master, but the creature in the armchair. He didn't even caught a whole glimpse of it, but he knew it was far from human, sent shivers down his spine, the atmosphere thick with fear, terror and death. One would think it was nothing for a shinobi like him, someone who has seen all the cruel things the world has to offer, but today he was weak. Suddenly he wished Pain would have chosen someone else than him to try and close an alliance with the dark wizard in front of him. "It is not often that I have visitors from so far away," croaked the voice in the armchair. "You said your master is interested in an alliance, yet I neither know who they are nor what power you have to offer." "My lord," Kanaki hesitated, not wanting to anger anyone, "my master, Pain, is powerful and feared in our lands. We are able to assist you in reaching your goal if you help us with his." "And what would your goal be then?" "We want the Nine Tails in our possession. His current location is Hogwarts and he is surrounded by powerful fighters. I'm afraid my master is unable to travel as far as I did, but other subordinates of his will arrive soon." "Hogwarts, you say? Then our goals have a similarity. I, too, need to get to someone who attends Hogwarts. Some extra help in destroying this damn school wouldn't hurt," the voice responded, and Kanaki heard it move around. "You will show me your abilities. After that I will make my decision." "Thank you, my lord, thank you," said the shinobi with low-hanging head. Even though he feared the unknown power of the creature, it was humiliating to kneel in front of someone who does not command him. Wormtail, the kneeling man in front of the armchair, raised his head. "Give our guest a place to stay, he must be exhausted." "Yes, my lord." The man, Wormtail, walked towards Kanaki, grabbed him by the arm and led him out of the room, downstairs to the kitchen. Kanaki tried to keep his breathing under control even when a gate snake passed by, which reminded him all too much of Orochimaru. Sakura sat hunched over a book in the library once again. The weather outside was anything but nice, and it would probably rain through the night, which made patrolling on the ground a pain in the ass. Good that it was not her turn then. The small lamp next to her made it able to see the words written down. She was the only one who sat at this table, which gave her privacy so she could write and letter home to Ino. She could talk all that much about the mission, but decided to describe all the magical things that were possible to hear, and Sakura was sure she would enjoy it. The pink-haired kunoichi didn't know where either of her teammates nor her teacher were right now, so she enjoyed the silence that surrounded her for once and kept on finishing the letter and reading her book. Tomorrow morning Yamato will arrive at Hogwarts to help Naruto with his training. Sakura was excited to see another familiar face again. All of a sudden a bag is slammed on the table and the chair is drawn back as someone let themselves fall on it. Sakura startled and looked up, only to see the bushy brown hair of Hermione Granger across from her. Sakura was slightly embarrassed at the fact that she didn't notice the other arriving, but she quickly focused again. The angry and concerned look on the brown-haired girl's face was obvious, and it was not often that you could get someone like Hermione to lose her temper. "What happened that made you so furious?" asked the kunoichi. "Not what, rather who happened," responds the young witch. "Umbridge is out of control. Why doesn't Dumbledore do something about her? His hands are tied, Hermione. If he could, I'm sure he would, but right now," Sakura drifted off, not so sure what else to say. "What did she do anyway?" I mean, just her presence can be angering, but that can't be it. Harry landed himself detention again after he got angry at her saying that you know whose existence is just a scan. She signed. I knew that there was something not right in her head, but she freaking tortures the students. Sakura frowned at that. They were absent for most classes today as Dumbledore requested their assistance, but she didn't think that Harry would manage to get tortured when they are not around to keep an eye on the teen. How? She has these quills that write with the writer's blood. Harry didn't want us to know. It was pure coincidence that we found out, explained Hermione. Have you talked to Dumbledore about it? No, not yet, she mumbled. The Kunoichi looked at her in concern. Go to bed, Hermione, you look tired. Tomorrow is also a day, we'll figure something out. It took a bit more than that to convince the witch to finally give in, but soon she was on her way to the common room of Gryffindor. Sakura continued to read for a while before she too put the book back where it belonged and made her way to the rooms. The next morning Naruto and Sakura woke up pretty early, but instead of staying in bed they decided it was actually mostly Sakura who did. Naruto just tagged along to already go to the Great Hall. In front of the huge doors they met a tired-looking Sasuke who constantly tried to suppress a yawn. They didn't really say anything, just nodded at each other as a greeting and pried open the huge double doors. The hall was empty except for the 5 tables and the 2 people standing at the end of the room. They immediately recognized the grey hair of their teacher and the brown mop of hair tamed by the metal of the forehead protector belonging to Yamato. Yamato Taicho, shouted Naruto excitedly, all fatigue forgotten, and threw himself around the older's neck. Yamato chuckled awkwardly at the blonde and patted his back a few times before Kakashi took his student by the collar and peeled him off of the other. Naruto, let him be. He just arrived and must be tired from the journey, reasoned Kakashi. Sorry sensei, Yamato Taicho. I was just so excited, grinned the blonde, not sounding very sorry at all. Yamato reassured him that it was fine, and slowly the other 2 also arrived at the end of the hall, walking in a normal pace and not straight up running like Naruto did. Both greeted the shinobi, Sakura more enthusiastic than Sasuke. After catching up for a bit, they noticed that it was almost time for breakfast, so Yamato excused himself and went with one of the house elves who showed him the room he would stay in. He promised to meet them for lunch and after school for the training. Naruto couldn't await. Draco wanted to vomit as his legs slowly started to get numb and his lungs protested against the hastily breathing. It also didn't help that he barely ate anything for breakfast this morning, so running around the Quidditch field felt more like torture than a lesson. After another round where the feet of the students trampled on the fresh grass, Professor Hatake seemed to take pity with them and ordered them to stand in the middle of the field. Today will be the last day of practical training for now. The next weeks we will meet in the classroom to study the theory, he explained with a rather passive voice and bored eye. As soon as you have that down we can start for real. Around the students you could hear most of them breath out with relief with the promise of lesson inside instead of the training they had to endure. I expect you to not slack off in the meantime. I don't care if you run around in the hallways or up and down the stairs, as long as you don't just procrastinate, we are good. That, the other way, made some groan. Draco did not care though. As long as he passes all his classes at the end of the year he will be able to withstand the exhaustion and cramps in his body at the end of the day. The class was dismissed shortly after and everyone started to pick up their belongings that were just thrown to the ground at the beginning and made their way inside to get to the next class. He watched silently as the group of Gryffindors chatted while walking away. Beside him he could vaguely hear Pansy and Blaze talk about the homework and potions that they still had to do, but his concentration belonged to the retreating students. Draco wasn't surprised that Harry and the others made friends with the newcomers. Well, maybe Sasuke made him wonder, but seeing that the stoic Slytherin was friends with the 2 sorted into Gryffindor it made sense. Since that one night he couldn't stop thinking about his new housemate after hearing him waking up from a nightmare when he himself kept himself awake to escape the terrors. When the curtains of the bed were drawn back he at first wanted to say something but quickly decided to shut up after seeing the glaring bottomless black eyes of the other. After he left the room, he didn't come back the whole night and only at breakfast he saw him again. Sasuke never once looked at him and either he seemed to not notice the Malfoy staring or he simply did not care and said nothing. Draco was curious. He wanted to know what managed to shake the otherwise emotionless boy, but he knew that getting answers was as easy as making Snape like a Gryffindor. The Slytherin signed once and began to walk towards the next class, not waiting for his friends to follow him. The thought of the Uchiha was not the only thing keeping him up. The images of the Dark Lord wandering around the hallways of his home, his loyal snake always by his side, made Draco's stomach twists more than the training lesson. The whole summer break was spent with the looming fear every time he turned a corner or entered a room. Often he considered telling someone about the evil residencing at the Malfoy Manor, but who had he to tell? All of his friends' parents were Death Eaters, and it was sure enough that they would continue their legacy. At night he asked himself if maybe he should tell his professors, like Dumbledore or McGonagall, or God forbid maybe even Potter. But every time he backed away, the chances that he would be believed were dim thanks to the way he behaved himself the last few years towards everyone who wasn't a bloody pureblood and a Slytherin. For the first time he felt powerless. They sat in the Dada classroom, waiting for the pink nightmare to enter trough the doors of her office when Naruto turned towards his bench neighbor. He stared for a few seconds, waiting for the other to notice his desire for a conversation. The other's left eyes twitched in annoyance when he felt the blonde's gaze on him. Just say what you want to say. Any Sasuke, does Malfoy has a crush on you, or why does he seem to always look at you? The innocent tone of Naruto's voice hid the snicker that threatened to leave his mouth when he saw the tip of the raven-haired boy's ears turn red. Near them they heard Harry choke in his own spit. He was clearly listening. Ron didn't hold back and snorted while Hermione tried to get Harry to breathe normally again. Don't be ridiculous, Dobby. The indifference in his voice betrayed no emotion. He just doesn't know how to keep his nose out of others' business. If you say so, murmured Naruto and turned his head to the side. Sasuke immediately noticed the change in his friend's behavior, but before he could find out what was bothering the blonde, the squeaky voice of the devil in pink interrupted all the chatter and made the silence echo through the room. She really makes me embarrassed about having pink hair. The thought that we have something in common, Sakura murmured into her palm, a grim expression on her face while she stared daggers at the professor. While said professor let some of the students in the class read out loud from one of the useless textbooks, Sasuke's mind wanders to many possibilities of how he would be able to shut that woman up once and for all. Mr. Uzumaki, continue reading please. Naruto began to sweat next to him. It was obvious that he didn't pay attention to the lesson, and Sasuke wanted to slap the back of his head at the fact that he slacked of in the class of Umbridge. Instead he pointed at the part of the text the student in front of them stopped reading. Mr. Uchiha, if you would please keep to yourself, stated Professor Umbridge sweetly. Mr. Uzumaki, is there a reason for you to not pay attention in class? Naruto swallowed and stared at the woman in front of him. It was clear to Sasuke what he wanted to say, but he dearly hoped, for everyone in this room, that the Dobby would keep his cool and not snap at the old hag. I need to, P. It was more of a question than an answer, and Sasuke wanted to slam his head against his desk as the class snickered at the blonde's words. Umbridge seemed to be taken back but quickly sorted herself out and didn't say anything else, just gestured for the shinobi to start reading the paragraph. As soon as they left the classroom of today's last class, Naruto jumped in glee and Sakura had to hold him down before he could accidentally fall down the staircase. Let's meet up with the others, she whispered into his ear. Naruto nodded and they said goodbye to the trio and then quickly went to change in their dorm rooms out of the school uniform and into more fitting clothes. They met on the border of the Forbidden Forest. Kakashi, Yamato and Sasuke stood there leaning against trees, waiting. The Jounin wore their typical attire. Sasuke decided to trade his for a pair of black pants and a loose black shirt. Now that everyone is here, we can begin, said Kakashi. Sakura and I will go to the lake. I already talked to the headmaster to make sure everything happens without incidents. He paused for a bit and Sakura nodded. Naruto and Yamato will go to our typical place in the forest. It should be secluded enough. Sasuke, I want you to go with them. In case something should not go as planned, you will immediately contact me. Kakashi clapped in his hands and let his lips form a smile under the cloth of the mask. Let's go. So the group split up and went their separate ways. Naruto and Sasuke ended up showing Yamato the clearing they've been training on for the whole time, and said man made a quick process in setting barriers for their and the forest safety. He then sat down near the border with Sasuke standing behind him, his arms crossed and gaze fixated on the blonde shinobi in the middle. On the man's hand was a symbol drawn with the brush in his pocket, and he stretched his arm out. With his other hand he stabilized his outstretched one. Formed in a square stood 4 wooden bars with carvings that resembled the heads of animals. "All right, Naruto, you know what to do," spoke Yamato, his voice serious and his eyes concentrating on the happenings in front of him. Naruto nodded and let himself fall to the ground. He sat himself comfortably and put his hands on his knees. His blue eyes hid behind the closing eyelids and his features began to relax slowly. Now they had to wait. When Naruto opened his eyes, he wasn't in the forest anymore, with Yamato and Sasuke looking at him expecting. The water covering the floor reached to his ankles. He stood up and faced the large ceiling-high metal bars with the seal keeping them shut and secure. Behind them was darkness, and a single red eye, burning with anger and hatred, stared at his vessel. "Look who we have here," the deep voice of the fox echoed through the space. The water ripples as he moved behind the bars and the red-orange fur came into view. The little brat decided to visit once again. "What, was last time not enough for you? Any Kyuubi, I thought we established that I wouldn't give up so easily. Big words for a child like you. Do you even have the slightest idea what I'm capable of?" In this moment, nothing Yamato and the others couldn't handle. "And with the others you mean that damn Uchiha brat?" The Kyuubi never took his eyes off of the smaller figure in front of his cage. "You really think you can trust him? What makes you so sure that he doesn't just uses you to gain my power? You don't know Sasuke. He would never. You seem to forget that I live inside you, Gaki. I can practically feel the fear and sorrow seeping through your veins." Naruto bit his lip and looked to the side. He was sure Sasuke would never betray him like that. Leaving the village and cutting all ties was one thing, but never would he use him to gain more power, right? He already got his revenge, there would be no reason. Naruto knew that, yet he couldn't stop himself from overthinking. The fear of losing Sasuke again was a constant factor in his life. When the raven-haired boy returned from Tobi's claws, he swore to himself to never let the other out of his sight again, that he would keep him by his side. He felt selfish for wanting that without considering Sasuke's opinion on that matter, but he suffered so much already, couldn't he have this one thing in life? "You doubt him? You are wrong, Kyuubi. You are convinced that you know who he is, how I feel, but in reality you are scared. Bold of you to assume that. I do not feel fear, I cause it, and all the people in your beloved village know that all too well." The large claws of the fox scraped against the bars, which rattled under the pressure. Naruto stepped back at the sudden motion and swallowed the lump that builded in his throat. Sasuke watched the red chakra building itself around his friend. The whiskers on his cheeks thickened and claws took the place of normal short fingernails. He has seen him like this before, back then in the Valley of the End during their fight. Back then he was confused, maybe even a bit scared about the other's transformation. When he learned about the demon fox sealed away in Naruto, he realized exactly why the villagers seemed to hate the Uzumaki so much. Sasuke held himself proud for not believing Naruto was the monster everyone made him to be. "Should we be concerned?" asked Sasuke as he eyed the boy. "Only one tail is visible, we should be good." "For now at least," replied Yamato as sweat ran down the side of his face. "We cannot allow him to grow, for the results would be dangerous and unfitting for our current environment." "Makes sense." Heard Orochimaru got his ass handed, the Uchiha couldn't suppress the grin spreading onto his lips. The damage was fatal. As much as Orochimaru getting beaten is amusing, it changes nothing on the fact that it is not only critical for us and the students here but also for Naruto. Sasuke said nothing after that and watched the frown building on the younger's face with slight unease. Suddenly a spike of chakra flared inside the barriers and made Sasuke's skin prickle. It definitely belonged to the Kyuubi, as Naruto's own was cool like a comforting breeze in the summer heat while the Kyuubi's was as hot as the scorching sun. "Don't worry, that's normal." Yamato, who sensed the Chunin's uneasiness, tried to reassure him, but it was a little hard to believe when the burning chakra met his pale skin. It felt not right, intrusive, and the young Uchiha had to suppress the urge to charge forward and snap Naruto out of his minscape. "You think you can control me, Gaki?" The fox's voice was low and threatening. "Many tried before, but none of them succeed. What makes you believe you have the power to do so?" "I don't have power," admitted Naruto, his eyes shining with determination as they never left the Kyuubi's gaze. "I have faith. Faith in you, in me, and in everyone who stands by my side." "Then you are even more naive than I thought. Faith alone will not bring you far in this world. It's time to know your place, Gaki. Any, Kyuubi, just watch. One day you and I will work together, Dadabayo, Naruto shouted at the gate fox, the trademark grin resting on his face, his eyes determined. The Kyuubi's own widened for a moment, surprised by the unwavering faith, before they narrowed and a short unamused sound left his mouth. He then turned around in the cage. Hey you petty fox, it's rude to just turn your back on me, Naruto waved around with his arms wildly, are you even listening? Oi, I'm talking to you. Unbelievable, murmured Naruto and crossed his arms in front of his chest, but telling me that I'm the childish one. And then he just ignored me, can you believe it? Asked Naruto with an annoyed huff and exaggerated hand gestures. It's pretty hard not to, answered Yamato indifferent as the blonde gaped at him. Yamato Taicho. You are supposed to be on my side here. Shut up, Dobi. Not you too, Sasuke. How unfair. Could you be any louder? We aren't really supposed to be out here, so how about you turn your visor down instead of announcing to the whole world that we are doing something normally forbidden, hissed the raven-haired shinobi as the three of them walked beside each other through the forest back on the school grounds. Sasuke is right. We should be quiet. It would only cause questions when we are seen leaving the forbidden forest when no one, especially not students, are allowed in it. And for a valid reason, responded Yamato as he looked around, making sure no creatures were hiding to attack them out of the blue. Hummed Naruto in agreement. But today went better than any other time I tried to convince the damn fox. We were lucky today, doesn't mean he will behave the next time, mused the Uchiha. You shouldn't worry, I don't. When shit hits the fan I know that I can rely on you and the others, Naruto grinned widely. Naruto whispered Sasuke with slight surprise before he schooled his expression again, even if we are there, if you slack just because of that, I will kill you. Okay, first of all, rude. Second, when have I ever slacked of? In the academy, the response was immediately and made Naruto's eyes twitch in annoyance. Just as he wanted to counter the other statement, Yamato interrupted them, we should not make any sound from now on. We reached the border of the forest. Dinner is in half an hour, so you should change quickly and avoid any questions on your whereabouts. Well then, see you Yamato Taicho, whisper shouted Naruto before taking off towards the castle, Sasuke hot on his heels. Yamato signed and also made his way towards the lake to meet up with Kakashi once again. The atmosphere in the Great Hall was light and as bustling as ever, and Harry found himself seated between Ron and Sakura with Hermione and Naruto across from them. He was in the middle of a conversation with the young witch when Seamus leaned in and addressed all of them. Did you hear? Some students were seen leaving the Forbidden Forest just before dinner. Sakura had to restrain herself from choking on her juice as her eyes automatically wandered towards Naruto, who just shrugged helplessly. She rolled her unbelieving green eyes at her teammate's response. Really? Do you know who they were or what house? Asked Ron curious. Nope. But when Umbridge finds them it's gonna get real ugly. Heard she was furious and tries everything to catch the rule breakers to deliver a proper punishment for their sins. Seamus mocked the high-pitched voice of their incompetent defense against the dark arts professor. Well, I already feel sorry for them, said Harry as he eyed his two new friends who seemed to have a heated conversation through just their eyes and facial expressions, just mutual understanding things he guessed. Hey, you guys know the new guy at the teacher's table? Suddenly asked Ron as he watched the brown-haired man next to Professor Hatake with caution. HM. Oh yeah, he is the professor's, assistant, replied Sakura, hoping it was not all too obvious that that was a bland lie. Really? Asked Hermione confused, why wasn't he here from the beginning? He had trouble with his family. Something about his aunt being in hospital, Naruto was quick to respond to the girl's question. But everything's all right now, right Sakura-chan? The pink-haired Kunoichi nodded to confirm and smiled at the three wizards who just made sounds of acknowledgement. But as she locked eyes with Hermione she could see the suspicion in them and shut down the lump in her throat with more juice. They had to be more careful around her. Hermione was smart, and even if she will not conclude that they are shinobi, she will be wary of them, and that could cause unwanted difficulties for the mission which they definitely not needed. At first Sakura thought it would be easy enough to hide their origin from the others, but what she didn't consider was for someone like Hermione to pop up and suspect anything. She had to make sure to warn the others later so they couldn't give the Bright Witch any more reasons to watch them. Across the hall a certain blonde-haired Slytherin observed the happenings at the Gryffindor table with slightly narrowed eyes. No other housemate tried to start a conversation with him, which he was glad for. In the last few weeks, the desire to speak left him, what also resulted in him not starting a fight with a random student, desirably Potter, in the hallway every other day. It seemed to surprise his friends greatly, and they often tried to get him to speak, especially Blaze and Pansy, but his mouth kept shut and his mind raced with thoughts that gave him headaches. Say, is there a reason for you to basically stab them with your gaze, or are you just being an asshole? Came the sudden question from his right side, and Draco quickly snapped his head in the direction from where it sounded, surprised to see the black-haired newcomer sitting there with an unamused gaze. It's nothing, he murmured absently, still progressing the fact that the other was actually talking to him instead of strictly avoiding and showing no interest in anything except his Gryffindor friends. The other just looked at him unimpressed, ice so cold it sent a shiver down Draco's spine, and he felt like he was back in third year, where he was dragged through the snow by an invisible Harry while the coldness bit through his many layers of clothes. What does it bother you anyway? He snapped at him. Well, great move, Draco, he thought to himself. Damn, brat. Knew it was a bad idea to talk to someone. The other boy spoke in a foreign language that Draco didn't understand but recognized as Japanese. His confusion must be on plain sight, because Sasuke just rolled with his eyes and turned towards his food again, deciding that all of that was a terrible idea and he would never speak to any of these students out of free will ever again. You're my friend. Say, Hermione snapped her book shut and looked at her two friends, her gaze serious. Did you also notice something suspicious about the exchanges? Come on, my own. We've had this conversation before, groaned the redhead from his seat near the fireplace, buried in pergament and open books. They were currently in the common room, Hermione having them make their homework early for once to spare them the stress of last-minute submissions. The fire was crackling in the fireplace. Harry was staring at the dancing flames rather than finding solutions for his potion homework. The warmth and soft sounds nearly lulled him to sleep, his head falling against the armrest more than once but eyes snapping open as soon as his skin touched the soft cushion. He was tired. Not necessarily the sleepy kind of tired, even if a good night's sleep was more than welcome. No, the concern about Sirius and the lies that were currently spread about him kept him up. Normally he wouldn't bother correcting any of the things written in the Daily Prophet, because it was the Daily Prophet and anyone smart enough did not believe any of the crap written in there if it just wouldn't be about the serious issue of Voldemort's return. Harry never quite understood how people could be so close-minded and stubborn to actually ignore the threat that hovered at the horizon. The Ministry of the Wizarding World was clearly useless, being the first to deny the rumors of the Dark Lord's return. It bugged Harry greatly and made his blood boil every time someone like Umbridge told him off, not that it only took her mere presence to make him a ticking time bomb ready to explode at any given moment. I'm just saying, Ronald, muttered Hermione as if deep in thought, it's like an itch that I can't scratch. They definitely do not speak the truth at given times. So what about it? Everyone has secrets, don't they? Replied Ron, looking up from his homework for the first time and meeting the determined gaze of his friend. Sure they do, but at these times, with all the threats hanging over our heads, secrets don't seem fitting, she argued, now standing up and pacing around the empty common room. It was truly a blessing that none of the other students used the space and they had some peace and quiet. Ron was ready to continue the conversation with the young witch when a sudden movement followed by a low hissing from the fireplace caught the attention of the trio. The face of one Sirius Black formed itself in the orange flames, making the three Gryffindors huddle in front the fire, careful to not lean in too far. Sirius, what are you doing here? Hissed Harry in a low voice, hoping more than ever that no one came in and interrupted them. I just want to check in and hear how you're doing. I heard about Umbridge, seems like the Ministry does no half-assed business, he said with his face moving around with the fire. It's dangerous, what if someone catches you? Harry felt anxious at the thought of his only remaining family getting taken away from him. Not again, he thought. Let that be my concern. Don't worry about me, I'm as safe as I can be, you should look out for yourself. Things do not look good, Harry. What are we supposed to do? Questioned Hermione. Umbridge has more and more control over the school as days pass by. Dumbledore's influence is decreasing constantly, and with the Ministry trying to shut down any word about Voldemort, it is not helping our case. The Order is doing what they can. Don't worry about the Ministry, we will handle it. Better find a way to avoid Umbridge. The frown on Sirius's face is increasing. I must go, someone's coming. With that, the fire returned to its original shape, right on time, as footsteps hurried down the stairs from the boys' dormitory. The kid, probably a first or second year, stopped at the side of his seniors kneeling so close to the fire before walking towards the exit as fast as his little feet could carry him. The three of them quickly stood up again. Outside, thunder cracked the silence of the night and rain started to pound even harder against the window. Hermione's eyes were focused on the darkness outside as a bolt of lightning illuminated her face. Harry wasn't sure what he was supposed to make out of her expression as she began speaking. "We've got to be able to defend ourselves." Ron and Harry locked eyes before turning towards the female once again. "And how do you think we're gonna do this?" asked Ron. "Umbridge has eyes and ears everywhere in the castle," reasoned Harry, "and she's not very fond of us Gryffindors. She is gonna hover over us like a hawk, waiting till we make a mistake. Then we find a place outside the castle," argued Hermione. She seemed to form the beginning of a plan in her head. "We can't just sit here and do nothing." Both boys sighed. She was obviously right. Sitting still while the world around them burned to ashes was never an option, but it was easier said than done. They were students, and while Harry was sure that many others would welcome the idea of protests against Umbridge's system, the risk was high and the guarantee of success slim. He voiced his concern to his friends, the people he could trust to have his back. "We are gonna need help," Ron said and directed a knowing look at them. "Rebelling against Umbridge sounds wicked." The blonde sat on his bed and looked at the two boys in front of him with interest before nodding to himself. "Count me in." "Wait, really?" Harry wanted to know. He was sure that Naruto would be supportive, but that was easy, voiced Ron his exact thoughts. "How you guys planning on doing it?" asked Naruto, curious. He had very little thoughts against their plan. It was in his blood to fight for what was right, and doing absolutely nothing while the enemy gathered forces did not sit right with him. "Well, Mion's talking with Sakura right now. That won't be a problem. I'm positive that Sakura-chan will not back down from this challenge." "Great. We want to collect as many students as we can from different houses and years. If we want this to be successful, we can't cut short in numbers. The more the merrier. I'm gonna talk with Sasuke tomorrow, if you don't mind." It was no question. Naruto's tone let them know that no was not an answer for him. Still, Ron voiced his concern. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "Not because I don't trust him or anything, it's just that Slytherins never back down from a chance to, dash." Ron gestured around with his hand, clearly uncomfortable with what he was saying before shutting his mouth. Naruto just chuckled at the other's reasoning. "Believe me when I say that any secret is safe with Sasuke. I know that he looks far from trustworthy and can behave like a real dick, but he is one of the realest friends you'll ever get. Bringing him in is the right thing to do." "Then we'll do it like that," said Harry after shaking himself out of shock at the other's sincere words. "We should head to bed now. It's been a long day." Ron instantly let himself fall on his bed and stretched across the cushions while letting out a big yawn that seemed to swallow all matter within a radius of 30 centimeters. Harry just began changing out of his uniform while Naruto, already in t-shirt and sleeping pant, buried himself under the warm duvets. A long night lay before him, consisting of walking up and down the school grounds and checking in with Sasuke. While the amount of shadow clones he creates is quite helpful for the task of patrolling, the loss of chakra in combination with early rising and lessons the next morning make him grumpy and so not ready for anything. Not even a few weeks into the mission and you're already starting a rebellion. Shouldn't really be surprised now, should I? The question was obviously rhetorical and Sasuke 100% didn't want to hear an answer as he turned away from the younger and began stalking down the dark corridor. Naruto still decided to shrug, not counting it as a real reply before following the moody teen on his task. "I know that you agree with this, do not dare pretending otherwise. Didn't say I wouldn't do it. Someone has to look out for your dumbass." Dobby, the Uchiha, kept his tone indifferent, which had Naruto roll his eyes. "Oh please, we all know you love my ass." It was meant to be a joke, obviously. What else could it possibly mean? Sasuke wouldn't even try to understand the other's reasoning behind saying this. Yet, the pink dust on the tip of his ears made him swear mentally, all while the reason for his embarrassment strutted past him, continuing the walk towards the staircase. "Stop saying stuff like this," Yuzuru Tonkachi grunted and tried to inconspicuous fix his hair so it covered parts of his still blushing ears. For a while they both walked in silence. From time to time one of the many moving portraits complained about the two of them marching by, supposedly waking them up from their slumber. Sasuke asked himself how they were sleeping if they, theoretically, weren't even alive, but left it in the unknown. The one time he started a conversation with someone who wasn't one of his teammates made him regret his choice immediately. He just couldn't stand the blunt prick drilling his eyes into Naruto. You know, Naruto hesitatingly broke the silence between them. Come to think of it, I never thanked you. Sasuke halted in his steps. Where did that come from, he asked himself. Naruto was never one to get sentimental too often, and with the choice of words and the way he said them so carefully while his eyes were downcast it made something pull at his heartstrings. What you could possibly thank me for, he didn't mean for it to come out as a sneer, yet Naruto did not seem to care when he straightened his posture as if to prepare himself and looked him directly in the eyes. Holding eye contact never was a problem of his. His mother used to do it every time she suspected him of telling a lie, as if she could look into his very soul to find the truth there. Come to think of it, she probably could. But with the way the blue eyes seemed to hypnotize him, made him look away. Was this how people felt when I used the Sharingan on them? Everything. The sincerity in Naruto's words nearly knocked the air out of his lungs. Sasuke had no idea how to reply, and as if sensing his friend's struggle he set himself to speak again. You came back. After you left, everybody told me that it had no use to chase after you. Told me it was a waste of time and that, even if I were to find you, I could not give you a change of heart. His voice was barely above a whisper now. I never understood why you would bend the skies just to get me back to the village, Sasuke admitted. His throat suddenly felt like sandpaper, too raw and dry, like a thirsty man in the desert. I told you before, you are my friend. One of the only people who never saw me as a monster. You saw who slumbers inside me with your own eyes, yet you never treated me like an outcast because I'm a Jinchuriki. It is quite difficult to see you as a threat when you can't even remember a simple code word. The ready of this moment was what made Sasuke regret the words in an instant. They were not meant to be rude. For the first time, his words weren't supposed to cut, but the uncertainty was what made him fidget. And he didn't like it, not one bit. The Uchiha was used to being in control over his own emotions and action. But Naruto just chuckled at his words, not denying them, knowing that he was forgettable at times. That is what I have you for. And Sakura-chan and Kakashi-sensei. Even if you don't say it or show it, I know that you care about me. The smile that accompanied his words made Sasuke's mind go all fuzzy. It was all teeth, the whiskers bending on his cheeks as his eyes turned into crescents. Sasuke could not take it any longer and turned his black bombless eyes away from him. All of a sudden the stones of the wall seemed fascinating, and he seriously considered punching himself for the vulnerability he felt right now. He was never good at holding conversations, especially the type they were having at the moment. The bearing of Naruto's feelings, something about the way he could read between the lines of Sasuke's actions and words, made him content. What would I do if he would not be by my side? Sasuke had asked himself this question before, on the many sleepless nights he spent back in his bare apartment in Konoha. With most of the furniture still the same, the Uchiha crests on the wall above his bed and the old framed dusty picture of Team 7 on his half-filled drawer. He felt haunted every time he lay alone by the terrors that were his life. He thought about the what-ifs, unhealthy to do but better than confronting the sights his nightmares held ready for him. More than often he strolled down the empty streets of the village with the moon and few street lights being the only sources of light. And even more often than he would ever admit, Sasuke found himself standing in front of a familiar building. Most of the windows were dark, but the one that mattered the most nearly always had its light on, shining brightly and guiding. He never went up the flight of stairs to knock on Naruto's door. He felt like he shouldn't without a reasonable explanation for his visit other than the "I can't sleep and wanted to see you because you are the only reason I'm staying" type of shit. You are my best friend, of course I care. Sasuke didn't say it loud, it was merely a whisper under his breath, but he knew that Naruto heard every word by the way his breath seemed to hitch before he giggled. Just when I think I figured out the complex mind of yours, you come and surprise me once again. My mind is a dark place, you don't want to be there. I believe that is my decision to make, don't you think? The innocent and carefree tone made Sasuke lift the corners of his mouth. Let's go, Dobi. The castle ground won't patrol itself. That seemed to pop the little bubble they were in and made Naruto groan in response. I would trade my kidney to be able to lie in my bed right now, the blonde whined as he rubbed his eyes. Stop your dramatics. Now go before I tell Kakashi that you thought about ditching. You wouldn't dare, gasped the younger at his companion. Where is the sentimental Sasuke from seconds ago? I would like him back, he's so much nicer than you, Temi. Instead of replying to the shinobi's obvious provocation, the raven-haired teen turned away and vanished down the hallway towards his operation zone. Bastard, muttered Naruto with no real bite in his voice before also taking off. A yawn escaped his mouth before he could stop himself. The sound of his loud intake of air overtuned Professor Snap's monotonous voice as the potion master rambled on and on about the ingredients of a potion Naruto already forgot the name of. Who the hell gives them these weird Latin names anyway? Mr. Uzumaki, if you would kindly shut your mouth. I do not desire to look down your oral cavity, interrupted Snape his lesson to turn towards the blue-eyed boy. I'm sorry, Professor, he declared and tried to muster all the sincerity he could find within his body. The professor merely sneered at him and his apology before continuing with today's lesson. Potions was not one of Naruto's strengths. He knew that by the time the first half of their first ever potions class was over and he understood exactly nothing the teacher spoke about. But he didn't really mind. To balance his upset knowledge in potions, he bloomed in transfiguration and charms. Even in divination he wasn't half bad and the teacher took a liking to him, maybe a bit crazy but genuine. So with no interest in the class and a sluggish mind he tried his best to keep his eyelids from dropping shut and letting himself lull to sleep with low voices and bubbling cauldron on the teacher's desk. With the patrol ending a bit later than planned after a fallout with a ghost named Peeves, who drove the Uzumaki up the wall, he fell asleep as soon as his head hit the soft pillow. And while the bed was quite nice, he missed his own back in his apartment in Konoha. It may be not as big as the one here, but he had it since the beginning of time. It brought him a sense of comfort. Potter. The sudden shout of Harry's name snapped Naruto out of his sleepy mindset and back to reality, where he still sat in the muffy classroom down in the dungeons. He quickly turned his head towards his new friend to see what made Snape so furious, only to meet a sheepish-looking Harry with an overflowing cauldron in front of him. Did I say to use the cauldron, Potter? Snape didn't even say it as a question. No, Professor. I'm sorry, I don't know how it happened. Snape obviously didn't buy any of it, and while he kept his face as passive as possible, the rest of his body was tense and ready to pounce at Harry and strangle him as soon as he dared to speak another word. You are going to stay behind and clean that up. And while you're at it, you can do the other desk too. Maybe that will be a lesson for you, Snape snapped and turned back to the board where a list of the ingredients was written down by a floating piece of chalk. Today was most definitely not Harry's day. First he overslept and didn't manage to make it to breakfast on time, and while he was grateful for the small amount of food Ron stuffed into the pocket of his cloak to give it to him before the lesson began, it was not enough to keep him running till lunch. And now not even that will work out, as he was too busy scrubbing the remains of the insides of his cauldron from the desk. As much as he dragged a sponge over the surface, the stuff was persistent and it made him scowl. Why don't you just use a spell to clean this up? Aren't you supposed to be a wizard, Potter? Harry prided himself in not flinching when the voice of Draco Malfoy sounded from the classroom door. He turned his head towards the platinum-blonde Slytherin and gave him the most unimpressed look he could muster. And tell me how exactly I am supposed to do that without my bloody wand, Malfoy. Snape confiscated his wand till he was finished with his punishment for something he didn't even do, but it's not like the professor would listen to him. He really tried not to think about his friends sitting in the Great Hall after getting kicked out of the classroom for wanting to help, eating delicious food while he was playing maid. Harry sighed as he realized that Malfoy did not plan on saying something soon and decided to ask instead, "What do you want, Malfoy? If you will just stand there and watch for your amusement, then you can kindly sod off." "No, that's not Dash." He cleared his throat and looked everywhere except Harry. "That's not why I'm here." "And why you then?" "Because I cannot think of any other logical reason for you to be here," Harry replied before turning back to the desk and the troublemaker stain and started scrubbing again. He was so concentrated when he noticed that the stain slowly became less that he didn't see Malfoy suddenly standing next to him before it was too late. Harry flinched violently and accidentally knocked over the bucket standing beside him, resulting in all the insides emptying on the desk and floor. Bloody hell, he cursed and quickly kneeled down to soak up as much water as he could. It nearly reached his backpack sitting beside the desk, and Harry already saw himself begging Hermione for drying charms, too scared that he sets them on fire by accident. But before any of that could become reality, the water vanished inside the bucket again as if nothing happened. Harry looked at the bucket and then at Malfoy, who had his wand out, previously outstretched hand now hanging loosely by his side. "Thanks," Harry mumbled, still shocked by the act of kindness from none other than Draco Malfoy. "No problem. That was my fault, shouldn't have startled you," he explained while scratching the back of his neck nervously. He then seemed to remember something because he quickly searched through his cloak pockets. Finding what he wanted, he extracted a small paper bag and handed it to Harry with a hesitant smile on his lips. Harry just looked at Malfoy's hand with the paper bag in wonder before taking it slowly. As soon as the bag left Malfoy's hand, said boy hurried out the classroom, not once looking back. The Gryffindor curiously looked inside the paper bag and found a small ration of today's lunch inside, still warm probably thanks to a charm. He looked from the bag to the door, where he had last seen Malfoy, and back at the food again. His mind was a big mess, many thoughts swirling around but none of them making sense. It took the chatter of some students passing by to snap Harry out of his thought and make him realize the smile stretching across his lips. "Don't jinx it." The blonde knucklehead ninja sat on a rather rotten-looking chair they fished out of one of the room's corners. The thick jacket and beanie on his head prevented the cold air from tormenting him as the wind whistled through one of the cracks between the wooden boards that were the wall. The whole establishment was rather shabby, and Naruto, in all honesty, would not have entered it out of free will. But Hermione thought of it as a good and secret enough place to present their idea of an extra training group for Dada to the selected students of different years and houses. He could see from his place between Sasuke and Sakura that most of them were still skeptical about the whole thing. Naruto was no stranger to the opinions many of the students had about one Harry Potter, even though he didn't quite get their origin. While Harry was nice to them, he was pretty popular around school and the whole wizarding world, and as always people seemed to find joy in guessing one's character based on what they saw in newspaper articles or heard in rumors. It made no difference where you are in the world, some things just never change. Next to him, Sasuke rolled his eyes at a boy he doesn't remember his name nor house very well, who questioned Hermione about the idea of private lesson. He couldn't really blame him, the boy must really be ignorant if he had to ask for a reason. "Why?" Ron asked, annoyed, and everyone's attention turned to the redhead. "Because you know who's back, you tosspot." "So he says," the boy argued. "So Dumbledore says," contiered Hermione. "So Dumbledore says because he says." "The point is, where's the proof?" Sakura shook her head at the boy. "What an idiot," she muttered under her breath, yet not planning on concealing voicing her opinion. The boy, who sat just 2 chairs away from them, poked up at the girl's words and turned around. "Say that again." "I said you're an idiot." She sat up straight and continued making eye contact. "You want me to spell it out for you?" He scowled at Sakura, clearly frustrated with her attitude towards him, while Naruto giggled into his hand. "Quite sad how less faith you have in your classmate. As far as I know, Potter is the one who will save your sorry ass should anything go downhill," interfered the Uchiha, slowly turning towards the boy with indifference. "Who even invited you? Bringing a Slytherin into this is a bad omen. You're probably gonna snitch on us all." "I'd agree with you, but then we'd both be wrong," declared Sasuke. "If all wizards are like you, then there's no wonder in why your school was able to be overthrown. To believe rumors is poisoning your mind, but I don't expect someone of your intellect to understand." "You calling me stupid?" the boy growled and flared his nostrils in anger. "Yes. I'm glad the message got across." "Okay, enough," Hermione interfered before either of them could continue their less than pleasant conversation. The boy fell back into his chair and crossed his arms in front of his chest while sulking like a child. The other students, who till now followed their conversation with interest, turned towards Harry again, who sat there, looking rather lost at the whole situation. Fortunately, he seemed to catch himself rather quickly. From the small crowd, another boy with longer hair who sat next to Ginny Weasley spoke up after a few moments of silence. "If you could tell us more about how Diggory got killed." Another round of silence enveloped the room. Naruto could see various emotions crossing Harry's face. He read about Cedric Diggory and what happened to him in the last school year during one of these wizard tournaments. It was clear that the young Gryffindor would rather not talk about his experiences. Naruto could understand, and even before he could argue on Harry's behalf that such a question was quite insensitive, the other already spoke up. "I'm not gonna talk about Cedric if that's what you are here for. You might as well clear out now," he said before turning towards Hermione and whispering, "Come on Hermione, let's go. They're just here because they think I'm a sort of freak." She tried to convince him to wait and try regardless, but it was no use. Harry turned towards the door when the soft voice of Luna Lovegood hindered him. "Is it true that you can produce an Patronus charm?" Naruto knew instantly what she was trying to do and nodded in approval at the support the younger girl showed towards Harry. Said boy just stood there for a moment, speechless and breath a bit ragged as he progressed her words. "Yes," Hermione answered for him confidently, "I've seen it." Dean expressed his amazement while Neville hesitantly said, "And he killed the basilisk with the sword in Dumbledore's office." Ginny confirmed, and Ron followed his sister and praised his best friend about the time he fought the Dementors, something the three of them also read about in some documents the headmaster gave them. Hermione looked around with a serious expression on her face, "And last year he really fought you-know-who." Harry interrupted her, "Hermione, wait. It all sounds great when you say it like that, but the truth is that was just luck. I didn't know what I was doing half of the time, and I always had help." "He's just being modest." The boy was quick to deny his friend before turning towards the small crowd of students. "Facing this stuff in real life is not like in school." Naruto could tell it was hard for Harry to talk about. He himself didn't like thinking about all the times he failed to complete a mission or lost someone he tried to save so desperately. He could remember that in the academy, no one prepares you for the real life as a shinobi. A life surrounded by death and sorrow. If they did, then who would possibly choose to become a shinobi? People often seem to forget what it takes to have this kind of occupation. When he walks by the academy some days after missions or when running errands, he is seeing all these kids running around and playing, smiles on their young faces and with bright eyes. He feels jealous sometimes. More than often he wished to go back to the easier days as Genin, fresh out of school and green behind the ears. "In school, if you make a mistake you can just try again tomorrow," Harry continued, "and everyone hang on his lips. But out there, when you're seconds away from being murdered or watching a friend die right before your eyes, you don't know what that's like." The others had their heads hung low. Naruto bit down on his tongue and took Sasuke's hand in his as he noticed the other boy tensing up beside him. He always tried to step around possible triggers for Sasuke, especially the topic of his family. The Uchiha's face betrayed no emotion, but Naruto knew him. So he saw the grief in his black eyes and the tense jawline as he gritted his teeth. From his right, Sakura peeked at her two teammates, her eyes held concern for both of them, but Naruto assured her with a quick nod that everything's all right. Harry sat back down in his chair and was joined by Hermione seconds later. Ron put his hand on his friend's knee, a silent gesture of comfort, while the young witch said, "You're right, Harry, we don't. That's why we need your help, because if we want to have any chance of beating Voldemort." "He's really back?" a small boy from first row asked. Harry nodded his head slightly, the atmosphere visibly tensed further at the affirmation of the Dark Lord's return, and some even closed their eyes in silent prayer. "Let's do it then." Naruto broke the insufferable silence and stood up. Sakura looked up and smiled before following her teammate, and Sasuke shook his head slightly while also getting on his feet. Harry and Hermione gave them a grateful smile as more and more students left their sitting positions and began gathering around the golden trio. She laid out a piece of pergament on the small and unstable table next to her. Student after student came to the front and signed with their name on the paper with the words "Dumbledore's Army" on it. Everyone slowly started to leave, trying to not be suspicious and failing if you asked any of the shinobi, while the three of them with Harry, Ron, Hermione and a few other Gryffindors walked in a small group through Hogsmeade, over the old bridge towards the castle. "We need a secluded place where we can train," said Harry. Ginny suggested a place named the Shrieking Shack, but Harry was quick to dismiss because of the lack of space. Another idea was the Forbidden Forest, and while neither of the ninja had a problem with that, even if they had to keep the students away from their usual training space, Ron didn't think of it as a good idea, so they dropped it. "What if Umbridge does find out?" the red-headed girl asked the obvious question. It was clear that none of them considered it. "Who cares?" asked Hermione joyful, and everyone looked at her in surprise. "It's sort of exciting, isn't it? Breaking the rules." "Who are you and what have you done with Hermione Granger?" Ron wanted to know in pure disbelief. After that, the Konoha Shinobi fell to the back of the group as the topic of the conversation shifted to Harry's love life. None of them took much interest in it, and they had other things to plan. Kakashi had to be informed about their plan, and a new round of training was scheduled for in 4 hours. So they parted ways with the rest as soon as they arrived at the castle, promising to meet up later, and made their way towards their teacher's chambers instead of one of the common rooms. A knock on the door of the headmaster's office made the old wizard look up from the papers decorating all the space on the giant desk. The past days had been stressful, and he feared that soon the rummaging of the ministry in Hogwarts affairs will reach a risky point with no going back. With Dolores Umbridge as the High Inquisitor of the school, her influence can have fatal consequences for the students and teachers alike. "Come in," he called out, and the door creaked open to reveal the mop of silver hair belonging to the newest staff addition. "Dumbledore-san, you requested my presence," the Hokage replied politely. The headmaster gestured at the chair standing in front of the desk and said, "Please, sit down. We have important matters to discuss." The Jounin took a seat and waited patiently for the old man to start talking. "The whole situation is getting out of control," Dumbledore sighed while leaning back in his chair and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "The minister has gone senile, his actions do more harm than good, and Umbridge's newfound power in the school has gone beyond ridiculous. I personally did not yet have the pleasure of having her visit my lesson, but I am afraid that my teaching will not be to her pleasing," Kakashi replied. He had thought about ways to get the ministry worker off of his back. It was his luck that the next few lessons were pure theory and not packed with physical activity. "I know my students, especially Harry and his friends, who will not just sit still and let Umbridge have her ways. My concern is about to become reality. They plan to rebel, and while I am proud to know that they fight for what is right, should Umbridge find out, then they are in great danger." Kakashi thought about it for a moment. From what Dumbledore told him in previous meetings, the minister fears that the headmaster plans to form some sort of army against him, which in itself was complete bullshit, but Kakashi figured that Fudge being out of his mind with fear made him do incredibly stupid and unjustified things. Should Umbridge look at his own class and conclude that it was a way to prepare the students for moves against the ministry, well, that would be highly unfortunate. "What do you suggest should we do?" the Jounin wanted to know. "I must be honest with you. My days as headmaster of this school are about to be over. I have no doubt that Fudge and Umbridge are already working on ways to remove me from my position." The serious tone in the older's voice and the hard look in his eyes reminded the Hokage a bit of the Third whenever he sent off Shinobi on dangerous missions. He didn't like it one bit. "You are under no circumstances allowed to stray from your original mission. Umbridge will force you to change plans, and patrolling and training will be a nuisance. I am confident that my students and I will be able to adapt to the given situation," Kakashi assured the man, and could see his shoulders sagging at his words. The pressure burdening him right now must weight him down. Being in such a public position and viewed as an opponent to the ministry must be quite stressful. "Another thing, you have told me about a mysterious rogue shinobi crossing your students' paths in Hogsmeade. You found any leads?" Kakashi had been looking since the day he found out about the incident, but the description he got was still too vague, and even after making contact with the Hokage and asking to search the registers and bingo books, no clue was presented to him. The search was quite disappointing. The owner of a shabby bar said he recognized the unknown shinobi as an old regular, but lately he seemed to avoid any of the establishments. While we contacted the Mizukage, with the road being a Kuririn, the appearance of his was too common. It was truly frustrating. Kakashi knew, he could feel it in his bones, that a storm was coming, and not one that was easily overcome. "You seem troubled. Care to share your thoughts?" requested Dumbledore as he saw the furrowed eyebrows and downward pull of his mouth through the dark fabric of the mask. "Should my assumptions be true, then I believe we have a far larger problem than Umbridge at this school," the teacher admitted, and the headmaster gestured his to elaborate. "As you have been informed, Naruto Uzumaki is the vessel of the Ninetales, and while there are no dangers of the Kyuubi escaping the seal, there are certain people after the power of the fox." The old man caressed his long grey beard in thought and nodded at the man in front of him. "The Akatsuki, I assume?" "Correct," confirmed Kakashi, "and while we were able to kill some of the members, the threat is still very much prominent. Even with less members, they will not stray from their plan to collect all the tailed beast. Seeing a rogue shinobi here where he normally shouldn't have any business makes me question whether or not they want to carry out the attack on Naruto here. It looks like the universe is not in our favor this year." Probably not, he mused. Originally the nature of the mission was kept a secret, with only the Hokage and my team knowing all details, including the location. It could be coincidence that a shinobi found its way so far west, a highly unfortunate one, but a coincidence nonetheless. There is no guarantee that he works for the Akatsuki, but it would be wise to not just dismiss the idea. The wizard clapped in his hand and announced, "Very well. You are expected to carry on with the mission as always. If in any way my presence at Hogwarts is to be removed, I expect you to report to Minerva." "As you wish, Dumbledore-san," confirmed Kakashi. "If you'll excuse me, I have to look after my cute little students. Hopefully they haven't done anything concerning yet." With a last I smiled, the Jounin teacher vanished in a cloud of smoke and left the headmaster alone in his office once again. Sasuke scowled up at the many wooden frames hanging on thick nails hammered into the wall of the castle. The amount of rules hanging there were quite concerning, and while he was sure that he would be able to follow them, even if they were not to his liking, his two rebellious teammates were not even nearly as composed as he was. The Uchiha boy was sure that sooner or later one of the two would find themselves in detention for disregarding them. But it was not what made him mentally burn them to ashes. All student organizations are henceforth disbanded. Any student in non-compliance will be expelled. It was not difficult to figure out who exactly she meant with that rule. It was sure no coincidence that just after they decided to establish a secret training group, the pink-clad nightmare of a teacher published a rule forbidding student organizations. For making sure that no word was spoken about this to not-so-trustworthy people, it was rather quick figured out by Umbridge herself. "You think she knows it's us?" asked Harry quietly, his eyes shining with concern. "We can't just give up now," pleaded Hermione while never taking her eyes off of the framed piece of paper. "If she suspects anything, we would be sitting in her office right now, if not the ministry itself. I'm sure it's just a precaution. Let's hope that is true." "I'm not eager to be the test subject of her newest torture methods," Ron added, and shuddered at the thought of detention with their new data teacher. He gave his best friend a quick side glance, who absently rubbed his thumb over the scarred words on the back of his hand. "I swear the woman is worse than the council," murmured Naruto from Sasuke's right. His usually bright eyes were dimmed and Sasuke could see the trouble in them. "Don't worry too much about it, Dobi. As if she would be able to catch us." The dark-haired shinobi smirked a bit and his best friend gave his shoulder a light punch. "Don't jinx it, Temmie. If everything goes down the drain, then I know who to blame. You know, when I accepted this mission, I was not prepared to endure all of your bickering," Sakura sighed annoyed. She wished now more than ever that Ino, or really anyone else, was here so she wouldn't have to experience all of this alone. Naruto just snickered at his friend's discomfort before turning towards the wizards and witch. "We should concentrate on finding a good place for our plan. Still, we need to be even more on guard." "After what she pulled with Professor Trelawney," Ron whispered and trailed off at the end of his sentences. He didn't need to elaborate his point. All of them remembered Umbridge trying to get the divination professor off Hogwarts grounds. Luckily Dumbledore could prevent it, even though it didn't mean that she wouldn't try again. They were about to go to the library, maybe finding a clue to a place large enough for their needs, when a heavily breathing Neville ran down the corridor towards them. Some of the bypassing students gave the poor boy odd looks before deciding to mind their own business. "Guys," he had to interrupt his sentence to take a deep breath, "you have to follow me. I think I found a solution for our problem." The grin on the boy's face was large and the group looked at each other before nodding and following Neville. Just minutes later they found themselves standing in front of a large wooden door with metal ornaments that magically appeared in a random, nearly abandoned corridor. The twins who they met on their way let out a low whistle as the door swung open and revealed a spacious room with a few couches and a fireplace. "You've done it, Neville. You found the room of requirement," praised Hermione, and they entered the dimly lit room. "The what?" asked Ron and Naruto in confusion. "It's also known as the come-and-go room. It only appears when a person has a real need of it," Hermione kindly explained, "and it's always equipped for the seeker's needs. So say you really needed a toilet." Sasuke just rolled his eyes at the other's question. It was as if Ron and Naruto shared the same overused brain cell. "Charming, Ronald. But, yes, that is the general idea. It's brilliant. It's like Hogwarts wants us to fight back." Harry smiled, suddenly feeling more motivated in his task. "So we have a place, only need a time. Everyone is able to make it and it can begin," concluded Sakura. She was excited not only to learn the spells the curriculum does not cover but also to go up against the unjust ice umbrage and the ministry spread. "And I think I already have an idea how to do that," smirked Hermione, already forging a plan in her mind. Yamato sat in silence on a small wooden bench he created. He was on the clearing their training took place in, and while today's session isn't about to begin until in 2 hours, he found the place quite relaxing. So far no dangerous creatures made a move to attack, and the Mokudan user was glad to finally get a sense of peace after the hectic of the past few weeks. Going on mission non-stop to look for any traces of the Akatsuki was exhausting, and looking after Sai, who had his own individual missions and was out of the village most of the time, made him feel like a single father. He can't say he liked it. The thudding of hooves against the ether ground of the forest made him open his eyes. He barely had time to activate his Mokudan as an arrow buried itself in the wood of his defense. Yamato sprang to his feet, ready for the next attack, when one of the forest's residents made his way into the light. It was a centaur. From what Yamato read in one of the books in the school's library, they were mostly supposed to be a peaceful species, only if you do them any harm they will clash back. "What is your business here?" the centaur asked with a strong voice, bow and arrow held high and ready to loose his grip on the string. "I don't mean any harm," the shinobi replied and let the wood disappear. Dumbledore told him it was better to not pick a fight with a centaur or any of the creatures living between those thick trees. They had other worries. "I was merely trying to relax." The centaur mustered him from head to toe before he warily spoke again. "I recognize you. You are one of these that use this clearing for their training." Yamato considered for a moment whether or not the centaur was feeling friendly towards him. Nonetheless, he went with the truth. "Then you must also be with that horrid Iou's man. He destroyed parts of the forest and injured one of mine gravely." The centaur hissed at him and raised his bow. The Anbu grew confused. Surely none of his companions would do that. The three Chunin were always either with Kakashi or himself, and the older was not known for causing random damage or injuring a being he was told to be in peace with. "I'm not sure what you are talking about, but I can assure you that neither I nor one of my teammates is the cause of the damage. He was wearing a headband like you. And these weird clothes. No muggle, but no wizard either. He was strong and possessed a power I have never seen before, very similar to yours and your friends," the centaur declared, his bushy eyebrows drawn together in concentration. A sudden idea invaded Yamato's mind. Was the symbol on his headband the same as mine? Dark eyes narrowed as they examined the forehead protector before the centaur shook his head, his shoulders less tense but still alarmed. It was different indeed. Yamato hesitantly grabbed the arrow lying next to him and prayed that the centaur wouldn't see it as a threat. He then drew a symbol in the earthy ground and urged the creature to look at it. Did it look like this? He couldn't keep the hopeful tone out of his voice. The centaur nodded, yes, as he stared at the drawn symbol of Kirigakure. The shinobi's eyes widened at the affirmation of his assumptions, and he quickly stood up before fixating the centaur with a serious gaze and speaking with a nearly demanding voice. "Tell me everything you know about that man." Dumbledore's army. Hate Kakashi had to endure a lot of difficulties in his life. Absolving the academy at the age of 5, being declared a child prodigy, and with his father being Konoha's white fan, expectations were thrown towards him. And while he mostly lived up to them, the pressure he was put under, especially after his father's suicide, left him with the need to prove himself to others. He had seen the horrors the world had to offer, losing every single person he ever cared about, even if he realized it far too late, and entering ANBU at a young age, breaking his soul and spirit. Blood drenched his hands, and the vivid nightmares that plagued his sleep, which made his skin itch uncomfortably and rub it bloody under the hot water of his kitchen sink till all the red leakade is gone. As a shinobi, it was his task to be ruthless on the type of missions he was normally sent to. Kakashi was good at hiding his emotions, not just thanks to the cloth covering half his face. It was a necessity if you wanted to survive, because emotion, while being a strong motivation, also make you vulnerable and easily manipulable for enemies. When accepting the mission to the foreign land together with his not-so-little Enamor students, he thought he was prepared, that it would be like every other infiltration mission they absolved, and far less dangerous too if you asked him. Even as Dumbledore told him about the plan and workings of Umbridge's new position at the school, he wasn't as concerned as he probably should have been. How could a single ministry worker be a threat to him who had been tortured more times than he liked to remember and has an occupation with rather low life expectations? He would be able to handle the presence of the shorter woman for his lesson, right? Wrong. He was so terribly wrong. The Hokage followed the slow movements of the defense against the dark arts professor with his bored as always single grey eye, the other switching in annoyance under the eye patch. He had to bite down on his tongue, nearly drawing blood, in order to not accidentally let a snarky comment slip past his lips. Kakashi had worked with people similar to Umbridge before. But opposite to his current situation, he was able to kill them at the end of his mission. Sadly, should he even lay a hand on this woman, it could have great consequences, and Kakashi may does not value his life as much as he should, but he valued his job and village's image. So actually shutting this woman up for good was sadly not up for discussion. "And you have never been to Hogwarts before, Mr. Hokage?" Umbridge asked in an overly sweet voice, her head tilted upwards to look into the Jounan's eye. "Not even as a student." "No, I went to a magical school located in Japan. But I am sure Professor Dumbledore already provided you with the necessary information regarding my position as a teacher here." Kakashi's voice was utmost friendly, yet the passive-aggressive tone sipped through at the end of the sentence. The scribbling of the quill against the paper Umbridge was holding made his hands twitch. "And as far as I'm concerned, the subject you have been teaching for this school year has never been taught before, am I correct?" "Yes." "Can I ask why this subject was established on this short notice?" "You can kindly fuck off." I assume the headmaster was concerned for his students, with the increasing number of children developing serious health problems caused by far too less movement during school. It is no wonder. It wasn't even that much of a lie, and Kakashi was once again glad that he was an exceptional liar with years of experience under his belt. "I see," said Professor Umbridge, who clearly didn't see at all. "What exactly are your plans for today's lesson?" Kakashi gave the pink woman in front of him one of his eye smiles before saying, "I am sure that if you would have let me start it in time, you would have found out either way, Professor. Seeing as you are a bit impatient, I will gladly provide you with my lesson plan." The scowl on the older woman's face amused the Hokage, her sweet and collected facade slowly becoming undone. "That would be very kind, yes," she gritted through her teeth, her long nails digging into the clipboard and the quill nearly breaking in half as her clutching hands pressed too hard. The roughly 20 students in front of them watched in silence as their professor pulled out a sheet of paper from under a stack of books. He handed it to Umbridge, who snatched it from the younger's gloved hands, slowly starting to walk towards the door where she positioned herself and gestured for her colleague to begin. In the silence of the room you could hear one of his students snickers as he glanced at the pissed-off professor in the corner of the room. Kakashi decided to just ignore her the whole time, not even looking in the direction, much less acknowledging whenever she seemed to have the desire of making a comment. He must admit that his class behaved rather well, probably because no one wanted to upset the woman lurking in the shadows any further. They were participating more than in their practical lessons, and Kakashi guessed that they were just glad they didn't have to move rather than being interested in the muscles of the human body and the type of exercise one had to do to train it. Kakashi didn't really like being a teacher, and while training the three little genin wasn't something he ever regretted doing, the responsibility and duty a teacher had was overwhelming. Also, grading was a bitch. Back in Konoha, grading tests or something similar was not the task of a jounin teacher. So actually sitting down and looking at all the answers these students scribbled on their paper, some in extraordinary handwritings, was a nuisance. He couldn't wait for the practical part to start again. At least then he could quietly, in the safety of his own mind, laugh at the students' misery. "Expelliarmus," said Neville with his wand held high, pointing at the weird metal mannequin holding a wand itself. It was the first meeting of the DA. The students lined up in a row with their wand out, ready to exercise the Expelliarmus charm. When Harry first declared the spell they would practice, many had been confused, not that Sakura could blame them. Expelliarmus was a first-year charm, and really easy one that her teammates and her mastered before anything else. But turns out Harry was not wrong in his choice, as many still struggled with it, and in the end, no one was complaining again. Neville had been the first to try and disarm the mannequin, but instead of the opponent loosing their wand, it was Neville's that was ripped out of his shaking hands and flew towards the line of students, all of them quickly ducking their head to avoid any possible injury. Neville let out a disappointed sign as he eyed his wand sticking out between the cracks of the wall. "I'm hopeless." "No, you are not. You are just flourishing your wand too much. Try it like this," advised Harry, and quickly spoke the spell, successfully disarming the mannequin while Neville watched his friend's wrist closely. After that, Neville walked to the back of the line, repeating the movement Harry showed him. The next few students seemed to have the spell down pretty good, but varying in power. With Ginny's spell, the wand made a large curve in the air before landing a few meters away. Luna, on the other hand, spoke softly, her movements graceful, and the wand landed in her outstretched hand. Others had the same problem as Neville, and the Kunoichi could tell that the Gryffindor boy was glad that he was not the only one being unsuccessful. They repeated this routine for quite a while, but with the group being rather large, the time went by quickly. Soon it was time for dinner, and many of them still had homework to do for the next day. So while Naruto was still practicing with the stoic Uchiha right by his side, Sakura eyed the few students that were already leaving in small groups. It was less obvious that way. The three of them were the last group to leave, apart from Harry, Ron and Hermione, with the latter insisting on cleaning up a bit. Sakura was sure they were going to discuss something rather than cleaning, because what was there to clean up, but she didn't pry and actually couldn't care less. If it was something that would bring their lives in danger, then she would find out soon enough. None of them were really convincing liars, and their alibis were shit. "See you later," exclaimed Naruto, and gave the three wizards a small wave before disappearing through the entrance after Sasuke and Sakura. They were walking down the almost deserted corridors of the castle. Occasionally a portrait could be heard talking to themselves, but neither of the three really paid any attention to it. "That was fun," Naruto broke the silence. He skipped in his steps, his arms folded behind his head and tie loose. A lazy grin stretched on his lips and his facial expression open and relaxed. Though it was a little shocking that some couldn't do the Expelliarmus charm, joined Sakura, a finger lay on her lips as if thinking about something. With the way the students get babied, it is no wonder that they have trouble with a first-year charm. "Oh come on, Sasuke. This is a complete different culture. We should be glad for them that they have not the same education system that we do," argued Naruto. And he was right. For them it was normal, graduating from the academy at 12 and then being an active duty shinobi, risking their lives day after day. Every shinobi has deep-rooted trauma. Both of her teammates being the perfect example for that. The wizards would greatly disapprove of their ways. She could see it in the way the headmaster looked at them when they first met. Like he pitied them, but that was unnecessary. They were used to it, and even though shinobi are not expected to live past 30, she wouldn't think of anything she'd rather do. Also the fact that without her medical skills, her team would have been dead years ago. They are still weak. The blonde let out a low chuckle at the other boys' antics. "Let's hurry. I'm pretty sure dinner has already started and I really do not want to miss it." He accelerated his steps and hastened down the flight of stairs, wary at first in case they suddenly started moving again. When he found that no one else was currently nearby, Naruto decided to fuck it and just leaped over the stone railing, dropping on the stairs below with ease. Sasuke and Sakura just looked each other dead in the eye, letting out a synchronous sign before they, too, jumped down the staircase, following their eager teammate to the Great Hall. The next day came quickly, and to the dismay of every student taking this class, Defense Against the Dark Art was on the schedule. "You will please copy the approved text 4 times to ensure maximum retention," Umbridge voice carried around the room, she herself walking the aisle between the desks up and down and looked at each student's book and parchment. "There will be no need to talk. No need to think more like it," countered Hermione and looked at her teacher with spite shining in her eyes. Naruto eyed Neville from the corner of his eye. He was whispering to himself, repeating the movement of Expelliarmus over and over again while training his gaze on his textbook. "One's away," threatened the professor before moving on. Sasuke watched Mr. Filch with narrowed eyes as the man hopped around behind a group of students on their way to a DA meeting. He rolled his eyes at the failing attempt of stealth and bad choice of hiding places. "What a fucking dumbass," he murmured to himself as Filch watched the group vanish through the familiar door. When the newly bald and dirty man finally gave up and disappeared down the corridor, Sasuke rounded the corner, but not before glancing back at the corner where he knew his blonde housemate was hiding himself. Draco Malfoy had been following him around for a while. The reason was unknown, but Sasuke couldn't bring himself to care about the other's reasonings. The wizard was absolutely no threat. Neither to him nor the causes of the DA, so he just let him be. He would eventually get tired of following one of Sasuke's clones back down the stairs and to the library. "Stunning is one of the most useful spells in your arsenal," explained Harry. "It's a wizard's bread and butter, really." "So, come on, then, Nigel. Give it your best shot. Everybody looked at the small Gryffindor expectantly, the group divided into two rows standing roughly 3 meters apart. At one end was Nigel, his wand in his hand looking a bit nervous, and at the other stood Harry, his hands gesturing for Nigel to bring it on. Stupefy, the small boy cried out, and the spell hit Harry square on the chest, sending him flying back a few meters and hitting the ground hard. Good. Not bad at all, Nigel. Well done, Harry complimented him. Unknown to the others, Filch sat outside the door with a small transportable chair, eating his bland sandwich while keeping watch. Don't worry. I'll go easy on you, smirked Ron as he walked to the other side of the room. Hermione just mustered him with an annoyed stare, and if looks could kill. Thanks, Ronald, said Hermione, her voice thick with sarcasm. As soon as Ron passed his brothers, they grinned from one ear to another, a few choruses of "Come on, Ron" coming from them. Naruto laughed into his fist as he heard the twins make bets about the outcome of this beside him. He debated whether or not he should join in, but then decided against it. A few seconds passed where the two only looked at each other, Ron rather smug and Hermione stern, before they both raised their wands at the same time. The Weasley was about to chant the spell, but Hermione beat him to it and shouted, "Stupefy." Ron landed on the ground with a loud thud as the girls began to laugh and surround Hermione, who was now wearing the smug expression. The twins passed money between them, while Ron walked towards them, claiming that he let her win because of his good manners. That earned him a snort from Sakura and teasing words from his siblings. "So who's next?" grinned Harry as some backed away from him, not wanting to get stunned anytime soon. But before they could waste any more time, Sakura took matters into her own hand and pushed both her friends into the middle of the room. "Naruto, Sasuke, glad you volunteered." Sakura, whined Naruto with a small pout on his lips. "What? You afraid you're going to lose?" Yuzuru Tonkachi. The teasing words did wonders for the blonde's motivation as he swirled around, speed walked towards the end of the room before facing the Uchiha again. "Bring it on," he shouted and took a fighting stance, his wand clutched in his hand, blue eyes burning with a challenge. "TSK." The others quickly scrambled out of the way, excited to see the two exchange students fight but not wanting to accidentally get hit by the spell. The pink-haired girl just crossed her arms in front of her chest and watched with amusement as the two faced each other. If her imagination was good enough, she would be seeing grass instead of the stony floor and trees surrounding the area instead of mirror-clad walls and pillars. Sasuke didn't hesitate and hissed a small "Stupefy." A second before the spell would have hit the Uzumaki straight on the chest, he pulled aside, his body turning, his face splitting into a grin and then countering, the spell now speeding towards Sasuke. But the spell hit the fireplace behind him, swirling up dust and making the students nearby cough slightly. "Is that all you got?" he asked his opponent, knowing that it will rile him up. "Stop moving around. You were the one who did it first, idiot." "Ah. Stupefy." Sasuke dodged. "Stupefy." Naruto turned to the right. "Stupefy." The spell hit the ceiling above Sasuke. "Stupefy." The students watched in amazement as the spells flew across the room, hitting everything but the desired target. "Okay, I think that is enough," Harry tried to reason but was blandly ignored by the two hot-headed shinobi. "Guys. Let me do it," said Sakura and laid an assuring hand on the teenager's shoulder. She stepped forward, making sure no spells were straying into her direction before she turned to Naruto first, blurted out the spell and hit the unsuspecting boy straight on. Then she faced Sasuke, the boy surprised by the lack of counter-attack from the Jinchuriki, noticed a bit too late that the stunning spell was coming towards him and sent him flying with a grunt. "You finished now?" she asked the two boys who just stared at the ceiling, scowling and refusing to move. She asked if you are finished. "Yes, Sakura." "HN. Scary," whispered Seamus towards Dean as he eyed the pink-haired girl grinning at her friends in triumph. The tall Gryffindor just responded with a small hum. "All right," Harry declared and clapped his hands, "I think we're finished for today. Please be careful when exiting, looks like Filch is keeping watch. Have a good night." He got a few responses but mostly everyone was just nodded along with his words, and when they escaped out of an side entrance, hearing Filch grunt around the corner as he moved in his chair, they rushed into safety one after another. "It is weekend soon," finally, Naruto smiled and stretched his arms in the air, letting out a loud yawn as they left the great hall behind. "I can't wait to finally sleep in. That makes patrol a bit easier." Don't forget our meeting with Kakashi and Yamato. We have to work on the weekends too, in case you forgot, reminded him Sasuke, and Naruto groaned in response. Well, it is important. He did say that they had a lead to the rogue shinobi from Hogsmeade, spoke Sakura. The three stopped in their tracks as they watched Filch balancing on the wobbly ladder. The many-framed educational degrees were joined by a new one. The students standing around had somber looks on their faces. All students will submit to questioning about suspected illicit activities, read Sasuke out loud, a frown drawn on his face. God, that woman is worse than Orochimaru, Naruto muttered and turned his back to the wall before strutting away. She is becoming even more of a nuisance, announced the Uzumaki and stared down at the headmaster sitting behind his desk. They were called into his office for a brief meeting regarding the new educational degree and the process in finding out the mysterious shinobi's identity. While that is undoubtedly true, there is not much I can do in this situation. Dumbledore signed and massaged his hands. The ministry is going to take over Hogwarts, and with the minister's mistrust in me, every wrong move could mean a nice time in Azkaban for me. Well, at least we can assure that no matter the ways of questioning she may use, all facts about our mission and other confidential things are safe with us, emphasized Kakashi. I never doubted it. The old man let out a small smile before continuing. It is unlikely that Umbridge will find out anything about your true nature. My concern is the group of students rebelling against her teaching. It could get them in great trouble should they be found. Don't worry, Professor. We will make sure that we'll stay under her radar as good as possible, assured the only Kunoichi. In case the organization should be discovered, we will do everything in our power to stop any consequences the members would have to face, continued Sasuke, his voice without emotion, giving a promise with much meaning. All right, I am counting on you. Now the issue with the rogue, reminded Yamato, who stood a bit behind the teen and observed the whole situation with a critical eye. Please, go on, demanded the headmaster and leaned forward in his seat, interested in every word that is about to leave Yamato's mouth. The centaur I encountered was able to give a detailed description of the stranger. He fitted the appearance of the man the three of them met in Hogsmeade, reported the ANBU. He is a missing nin from Kirigakura. From what the centaur remembered, he was mostly using water jutsus, occasional earth and strong taijutsu. I send a message to the Hokage, asking for assistance. This morning I received an answer, followed Kakashi, who pulled an envelope out of his jacket's pocket. The man's name is Kanaka Taido. An A-class criminal who left the village about 6 years ago. How exactly he ended up so far away from home is still unknown, but there is a high possibility that he is associated with the Akatsuki. Well shit, murmured Naruto under his breath. If he is Akatsuki, does that mean that they know I am here? Most likely, answered the boy's teacher. But how? The nature of the mission was kept a secret from everybody but the Hokage, us and a few confidential ANBU, Sakura wanted to know. They are the Akatsuki, they have spies practically everywhere. I'm surprised they haven't done anything yet, responded Sasuke rather stoic. But if they are really here because of me, doesn't that mean that the school is in danger too? Because I can assure you they wouldn't back out just because some children could get hurt. Right now, Naruto's mind was running a marathon. Thoughts kept on filling his head, every single one left unfinished as new ones invaded. He was worried, how could he not? Should the Akatsuki decide to attack the school only to get the Kyuubi inside Naruto, he wouldn't be able to forgive himself. Suddenly a pair of hands cupped his cheeks. They were cold and a bit rough from all the fighting, but they seemed nothing but soothing to Naruto. I can see the gears turning in your head. Stop worrying so much, it doesn't look good on you, said Sasuke with his hands still on the blonde's whiskered cheeks, his thumbs rubbing tiny circles across his clammy skin. Naruto, Kakashi's hand rested on top his head and ruffled through his hair rather affectionately. They won't get you, nor will they hurt any of the students. At the last part he gave the headmaster an assuring nod before turning towards his student again. You are strong. We all are. We will complete this mission without any losses on our side. They think the Kyuubi is easy to take, but they are wrong. Have a little more faith in yourself and the fox. I'll be in Hogsmeade tomorrow, asking around. Hopefully finding a lead. You will stay here and protect the students, Yamato's voice is strong and certain. The knucklehead ninja number 1 nodded his head with a small grin finally painted on his face. All right. You three should go to bed. Yamato and I will take over patrol for today. Thanks, Kakashi-sensei. Dreams and wager. Voldemort gritted his yellowing teeth, his thin lips parted in a frozen snarl and his face twisted in an ugly grimace as he hissed in disagreement. No, not just disagreement, plain disapproval with a large hint of murderous intent towards the rather strange guests currently residing alongside him and his followers in the grey and monotone Malfoy manner. They preferred to stand in the shadows of the room's corners, having everything in eyesight and leaving not even a speck of dust undetected. Their clothing was nothing the Dark Wizard has ever seen before. Black long coats that hid most of their faces, red clouds clashing with the dark cloth, and not to forget the straw hats with these hideous and outright annoying bells chiming whenever they set one foot in front of another. In his bony, ashen hand, the Dark Lord twisted his wand. The wood was warm against his cold skin and he felt the magic flowing inside. It is utmost ridiculous. You believing to be able to just march in front of the school gates and taking them down as if they are not guarded by the most effective spells to exist, complained a nameless Death Eater to the guests and, with that, abruptly pulled his master out of his thoughts. Complaining is all they did these days. It didn't matter whether it were the foreign guests or his own followers. Each time just one of them opened their mouths a headache was ensured. The difference in loyalties and goals were the usual trigger for the differences between both sides. Voldemort let his narrowed eyes glide over the room with a swift motion, capturing a painful, obviously sweating man near crouching next to a pillar. His robes were a bit ruffled and the headband was now tied around his neck rather than his forehead. The first shinobi he had ever met followed the ever-ongoing discussion with hesitant eyes, unsure of how to handle the situation before it escalated any further. The Dark Lord thought about killing just any person who dared get on his nerves, but found this to be rather counterproductive, seeing as every single one of them filled that criteria with ease. Nothing comes in the way of Samahada. It's a sword, the Death Eater replied to one of the taller shinobi, the stranger's face still obscured by the white paper stripes hanging from his hat. The man's voice was deep and breathy, laced with obvious amusement, as he answered. Yeah, and it's gonna cut you in half. See how much you can do then, with just one body half and a tiny stick. The Death Eater hissed in annoyance and tightened the grip on his wand so that the skin turned white and the veins popped up. My lord, came the nervous voice from his right. He didn't have to turn his head to know that Wormtail was twirling his wand in his sweaty hands. A nasty habit of his. The man's always been twitchy, never managing to look anyone in the eye and constantly cowering at his master's side like a dog. He definitely smelled like one. What is it, Wormtail? Asked the Dark Lord. His tone was tedious and hoarse, eyes continuing darting across the room while sitting high and mighty at the head of the long table. He was bored. His followers were taking too long gathering all the information he needed to finally put an end to this pathetic play of hide and seek he had going on with the rest of the wizarding world. It was time to rise again and spread the cause, get rid of all the filth infiltrating pure magical bloodlines like parasites in the community. But his following has suffered strongly under the many years he was away. Many were too cowardly to return to his side, a death sentence and they know it, or they were locked away in Azkaban, their souls ready to be fed to the Dementors. He did not care about them. Caring was something the Dark Lord has not done in a very long time. They were simply a means to an end, collateral damage, but the end was nowhere near in sight thanks to their lacking ability to follow straightforward orders. We were just wondering when you, my lord, would decide it was time to move forward with the plan, Wormtail said, his ringing with his hands while his head turned to the side, his gaze lowered to his feet. The Dark Lord wanted to click with his tongue at the man's question. If he wanted this plan to work out smoothly, he needed better, more capable, loyal, and cruel followers than he has now. Because there was no way he would fail now, not with his plan so far developed, not with the fresh alliance made, and not with Harry James Potter still well and breathing. Wormtail, he hissed, now looking at the rat-like man for the first time today, and when he saw him nodding frequently he added, it is time to free some of our fellow companions from the Ministry's clutches. Wicked smiles formed on the faces of the Death Eaters residing at the table. The men in the shadows stayed quiet as the wizards formatted for a strike. It was already dark outside when the shinobi decided to return to the Gryffindor common room. Only this time Sasuke graced his two teammates with his presence instead of making his way to his common room. The reason for the scandalous situation of a Slytherin entering Gryffindor ground was sweet, oblivious Naruto who had not the heart to part from his friend yet. With their arms linked, the three squashed themselves through the entrance after a rather ear-shattering performance from the dear fat lady. Naruto applauded her. He was nice like that. The young Uchiha got a few glares and furrowed eyebrows thrown in his direction as soon as his presence was detected by the fellow Gryffindors enjoying the evening on cozy couches or doing their homework on the desks near the staircase. Neither of the three felt like retreating into their rooms, their brains still working on processing all the information given to them in the headmaster's office. So they decided it was the perfect time for bonding and upholding friendships as they fell on the couch next to the troublemaker trio of Harry, Ron, and Hermione. "Because you got the emotional range of a teaspoon," argued Hermione while looking at her red-headed friend. Harry just chuckled at that, his back to the fireplace and his knees pressed to his chest. "I thought it was clear that all teenage boys lack emotional range," said Sakura as he leaned over the armrest of the couch. "Yet I hoped there were exceptions," Hermione sighed nearly playfully, trying to hide her grin behind her hand. Ron just scoffed, as if offended, while Naruto gasped, "What's that supposed to mean?" Don't even get me started on you," said Sakura and rolled her eyes before sending Hermione a meaningful look. Hermione's mouth opened as realization dawned upon her. "What? What is it?" asked Naruto, who had seen the stages of Hermione's expression, his legs bouncing up and down, making him look like a bouncy rubber ball. "He definitely has too much energy left." Next to him, Sasuke on the other hand looked calm, his expression like stone. Only his eyes betrayed a hint of emotion as he seemed 1 second away from nailing Naruto's feet to the ground. "It's nothing, Naruto. You don't have to understand," Sakura responded and made the universal gesture of "oh man." She then eyed Mr. Teenage Angst, who had now leaned back and looked relaxed for the first time since they arrived here, while staring into the fire. They were all quiet for a while, just sitting and letting the sounds of the other students wash over them. But that did not last for very long as Ron suddenly leaned forward, his lips moving into a grin and a gleeful glimmer in his eyes. "Did you know? Harry kissed her today." Ron kissed Harry and took the stray pillow, which normally lay on the couch, and smacked it into his best friend's face as hard as he could. "What the hell, mate?" gaped Ron with electrocuted hair. Harry just answered with a simple shrug. "Though I thought he had something with that Malfoy dude," that Naruto whispered in Sasuke's ear went unheard by the others as the broody teenager answered with a trademark HN. Naruto was just about to slip into the four-poster bed, the soft sheets and warmth calling out to him, as Harry startled awake with a strangled gasp. The blonde quickly let himself fall beneath the covers, trying to look like he didn't just finish a rather cruciating, in his opinion, training session. His eyes followed the clearly disturbed boy as he struggled to push himself into a sitting position as if his arms were jelly instead of skin and bones. Then Ron turned on the small lamp next to his bed, obviously tired but woken up by his best friend's distress. "Harry," he whispered as he dragged his feet over the edge of the bed and made his way over to his friend's side, "Mate, are you all right?" Naruto couldn't make out what the boy with the lightning bolt scar wants to say. His breathing was too heavy, too uneven, and near a panic attack to get anything useful out of him. Only bits and pieces he could understand, like a Mr. Weasley, snake, attack, and get help. Ron decided to sit by his side, his hand hovering over Harry's shoulder, unsure if he could touch him without him freaking out and sending him into another episode. He looked a bit lost, terrified too, and his eyes darted around the dimly lit room, meeting Naruto's at last. The other boys were slow to wake up. Most of them were convinced it was a dream and went back under the covers, others forced their eyes open to get a hold of the situation. The only solution Naruto could think of was, "I'm gonna get Professor McGonagall." The words barely left his mouth, leaving Ron no time to protest or anything. He was already out of the room, stumbling down the stair and out of the portrait hole so he could find the head of Gryffindor. "And what happened then?" asked Sakura, concerned. They sat together in Kakashi's room. As soon as Naruto had alarmed McGonagall of Harry's poor condition, he went to Kakashi for guidance. He just told him to go get Sakura while he informed Sasuke, and now there they are. Yamato stayed with the other in order to get more information and as a safety measure. "I ran to get Professor McGonagall. He was totally freaked out, didn't hear anything that we said," Naruto said, hugging a pillow close to his chest while he buried his toes under another. He had been in such a hurry that he forgot to put on shoes. Now his feet were freezing cold. "A nightmare," Sasuke suggested. "A vision," Kakashi interrupted any possible speculations made by his students. Dumbledore told me about them once. He did not say why Harry gets them, but they are about Voldemort. Like a psychotic connection. Harry sees what he sees and vice versa, Sasuke clarified. Indeed, yes. It started over the summer and seems to slowly reach its peak. It's rather concerning, Kakashi explained. Like a countdown or what? I mean, we all know that Voldemort is planning something, and apparently we also have to be concerned about the Akatsuki having gotten wind of this mission. It's getting more and more complicated. Shouldn't we order for backup? What backup? The village needs all its finest shinobi to protect it. It's not like everyone's friends with each other back there, scoffed Sasuke. He was the only one not in his sleeping clothes, still wearing the pants and button-up shirt of the school uniform together with his green tie loose around his neck. His hair seemed wild, or as wild as the hair of an Uchiha could be, as if he fisted it one too many times. What if they work together? Naruto asked almost anxiously. He normally wouldn't shy away from an oncoming threat, he will not this time either, but the thought of what could go wrong made him rethink everything, and then overthink it all again. It was like a bloody circle, the thoughts overbearing his mind. What do you mean? Sakura wanted to know. Apparently, she had enough of sitting down, choosing instead to pace up and down to the room, her arms crossed over her chest with a frown on her face. I mean, why haven't they attacked yet? The wizarding world is split, there is practically no unity as everyone believes something else. And sure, the protection spells of the castle are strong, but I doubt that there weren't any opportunities for the Death Eaters to kill Harry over the summer when he was still with his aunt and uncle. Sakura nodded in agreement. It sure is strange. With everything we heard about Voldemort, one would think he would be in a greater hurry. He needs more manpower, Sasuke summarized, and what manpower is better than the Akatsuki? If they really know that the Kyuubi is here and that he is in this castle, then wouldn't it be logical to find someone who knows how to enter it? Death Eaters and the Akatsuki working together. Even if it is just speculation, that would mean we are pathetically outnumbered. Wizards may have strong spells, but I doubt Akatsuki would be that easy to knock out, Kakashi mused. His eyebrows were drawn together in thought, and under the cloth of his mask you could see the corners of his mouth lowering with each thought that seemed to pass his mind. It was silent in the room for a while. No one dared to say anything, too caught up with everything, hoping desperately that they were wrong. Because if they weren't, and they could expect an ambush from the Death Eaters and S-class missing nin with deathly techniques and no remorse, then they were screwed in every sense of that word. I'm going to have to inform the headmaster and the Hokage immediately. Even if we should be wrong, right now I'm not in the mood to take any chances. You three should watch Harry carefully. Dumbledore has a plan to help Harry take control of his vision, but should that not work and he shows any signs of change, the Jounin said, but didn't continue. He was sure his students got the message loud and clear. Carefulness is the most important thing right now. A storm was coming, one that will swallow them all whole, and Kakashi would be damned if something were to happen to his students. The tense atmosphere was broken by Yamato. Arthur Weasley was rescued and brought to the hospital. He should survive, he reported, and Naruto and Sakura left out a relieved sign, while Kakashi nodded in acknowledgement. What about Harry? Naruto asked. Professor Snape will be in charge of securing his mind from any possible attacks originating from Voldemort. The two Gryffindors winced at that, remembering the way Snape handled Harry, and even Sasuke looked like he pitied the boy. Harry Potter and the Weasleys are to return to Grimmauld Place. Whether we are to accompany them is yet unclear, Yamato started, his whole body stiff. Thanks, Yamato, Kakashi said and received a nod in return. Man, I'm dead beat, the blonde shinobi yawned and stretched his arms over his head. At least you don't have a spoiled brat following you like a lost puppy, Sasuke scoffed. The shadows under his eyes were more prominent, Naruto noticed. He knew that Sasuke had problems with getting any sleep. They all did, and it irked him that his best friend and teammate was so far away from him. Normally on missions, they would sleep next to each other around the fire, in the same room, or at least close enough to feel everyone's chakra. But here in the giant castles, Naruto residuated way too far away from all of his teammates to feel completely comfortable. And he knew that it was the same thing for the others too. Especially Sasuke. He once told him, in the secret of the night when everyone else was sleeping and they were the ones keeping watch, that it eased his mind if he were near people he trusts. As if he didn't constantly have to keep his guard up, even though Naruto was sure that Sasuke will never let it fully down, he was way too wary for that. But that one admission, that Sasuke trusts him and Sakura nad Kakashi enough to feel that way. He had hugged him that night. And despite the grumbling protest that Sasuke let spill past his lips, Naruto had felt him relax in his embrace, even if just a fraction. "Is that why you are still in your uniform?" he asked. Sasuke shrugged. "I just don't see the point in changing when I am not sleeping. There is a lot to do, and wasting chakra on shadow clones because I am being followed around by a stalker is not helping." "Who's following you?" "You know them," Sakura wanted to know. "It's that Malfoy kid," Sasuke grumbled, yanking at his sleeves that were riding up his arms every time he moved. "Isn't he just as old as us?" "Why are you calling him a kid?" Sakura snickered. "Fuck off." "Wow, what a gentleman you are, Sasuke." She bit back and rolled her eyes. "Anyway, I'm going back to bed and hope that I will get at least a few hours of sleep. For the sake of all of us," Naruto prayed, which earned him a mean fist to his shoulder.